welcome to the Long Take Review, a film podcast with one eye always on the Oscars. I'm your host, Jen Bankard, and I'm here with the only one capable of seeing the only way, PT McNiff. How's it going, PT?
Jen, I'm the living manifestation of destiny, and I have made this podcast my mission.
I forgot that was the line. That's great. I really love that with this bit, I don't know what you're going to say because it's a joy.
I don't put it in the Google Doc. I have a separate document almost exclusively for what the quotes. And I also like that when we did the Dial of Destiny, poor Jim Clements was not aware that Greg and I do this, and he was just like, I don't approve of this, and I would not do it, even if I did know.
He wasn't into it. Sorry, Jim.
It's okay. No, he's probably right.
No, I like it. All right. Our mission today, if you haven't figured it out, should we choose to accept it? We're going to accept it, spoilers. Yeah. Is to look back at all the past Mission Impossible films in anticipation of Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. Hopefully I got all of that, which zip lines into theaters this week. So I'm actually going to see this tomorrow night. PT's going to see it later in the week, I think. Did you say?
I'm going Friday. My summer class ends Friday at 3:30. I'm in the theater at 5.
Yes. It's a great way to celebrate.
It is.
So, because this is a retrospective episode, like sort of to get us hyped for a new movie, we're going to issue a spoiler warning right at the top. We're not going to keep any state secrets. We're going to discuss all of the films in this franchise. There are 6. So, if you don't want one of them spoiled, maybe go do a full rewatch and then come back. Or not rewatch.
All the packages are out in the open.
Packages on the open.
Packages on the plane. Packages in the wind.
On the yes. I feel like they use the phrase out in the open in a way that now I'm never going to be able to hear that phrase the same way again after having watched all of these movies now. But yeah, so let's get into it because we already have. PT, what's your history with these movies, with the Mission Impossible franchise?
Well, I mean, I'm all the way back to opening weekend of Mission Impossible, the original movie. I would also say I predate with the franchise before the movies even came out. I don't know if I ever really watched the TV series. That feels like a Nick at Night TV Land kind of thing that they would sometimes have, the 60s and early 70s series. And there was a reboot in the 80s that wasn't on for too long, but that it feels like something I would have been like, that looks interesting. And then I'd watch it and find it boring, kind of like the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles. I'd be like, this is a great idea that I don't like because I'm 10 and this is not engaging enough for me. But as linked in our document, I did own and consistently play the Mission Impossible NES game, which came out in 1990 and was like a top-down sort of like Smash TV, or to bring it back to the podcast, sort of like that scene in John Wick Chapter 4 with the exploding shotgun.
Oh, right, yeah.
Thing. It was set up like that, and you had to like go and like hack things and like break into systems, and you switch between 3 different members of the IMF team from the TV show. So I love that. I loved any sort of spycraft Nintendo games, which were obviously not very complex because they were Nintendo, but those really worked for me. So when they were like, they're making a movie, I was like, great, I love it. And saw the first movie in the theater, had a great time. I don't want to give away how I feel about the other movies. The only one I didn't see in the theater was Mission Impossible 3, because that was really like, that came out right at the peak of Tom Cruise backlash, which I think we'll get into maybe. And it just sort of felt like these are over. It's been a decade since the first one, and this is the third one. And I feel like even though the reviews, like in retrospect, were kind of good, I just remember no one I know wanted to go, and no one was like interested. No one I feel like if anyone had like pushed me a little bit, I would have like easily gone, but like no one did. So I didn't see that. But then the last 3, I mean, opening weekend, I've been there for each of them and had a great time. How about you, Jen? What's your extended history with the Mission Impossible movies?
I have a small question based on the poster for the video game that the link you put in the Google Doc, and I opened it. I'm looking at it now. So Emilio Estevez looks like he's on the front of this
That's the thing. It's not Emilio Estevez. I don't
because
know
this
if those are
predates the movie.
I don't know if those are actors from the 80s TV show. Like Peter
Oh,
Graves is definitely there. And he was the only actor from the original show who carried into the 80s show. People listening may know him as the pilot from Airplane. That's how I
oh, that's
know
right. Yeah,
him.
yeah, yeah.
And so he's definitely there. So I'm assuming the other representations are the actors whose names I don't recognize from the 80s show.
So
But it
then
looks
maybe
so much like Emilio Estevez
it really
that
does.
when they were like, I mean, I don't know if I fully connected it, but I was like, well, yeah, Emilio Estevez being in Mission Impossible makes a ton of sense. He was on the cover of the Nintendo game. So that's fine. Which just, only since we've already issued the spoiler warning, everyone's message self-destructed, so they have no choice. When he is killed almost immediately in Mission Impossible, it was an even bigger twist for me, thanks to the shady artwork for an NES game.
But now I'm thinking like now I want to go look up is what maybe he was in. He could have in theory been in the sequel series in the 80s, right?
I mean, he wasn't a main character because I did look at the cast list for it.
Oh,
I was like, did any? Because if you look at the cast list for the original series, like it's not nothing. It's Leonard Nimoy is on it for like 3 or 4 years post Spock. Like Star Trek ended and he went right to Mission Impossible.
what?
Leslie Ann Warren, who's Miss Scarlet in Clue, is on it for a season. The main guy for the first year, or like one of the main guys, is the old DA from Law and Order in the 90s. And Martin Landau is on it, I think, the whole time. Like he's just in it forever. So it's like a lot of people came out of Mission Impossible, the first one. That is not true of the cast for the second series. All due respect to all those people who I'm sure worked very hard, but they do not have recognizable names after in 2023, and none of them say Emilio Estevez. So I don't think he was on it. I think it's
Okay,
just happenstance.
that's so weird. Anyway, so I mean, my confusion probably is an indicator that I don't have much of a history with the origins or this franchise in general. So I remember seeing Mission Impossible 1, so the first movie with Tom Cruise. I think it was pretty soon after it had come out, which I don't know if we've mentioned, it was 1996. So the original Mission Impossible movie was 1996, which I didn't remember at all. And when I went to go back to rewatch it, I was just like, whoa, 90s. This is very 90s. But I had seen that movie relatively soon after it came out. I don't think I saw it in theaters. I was 13 at the time. I think I remember my dad was sort of like a big influence on my early movie watching. He loves martial arts films and action films, and he loves basically the is it the Expendables, that franchise with
Mm-hmm.
like every single major action star
Yes,
from, like, that's made for him basically, like those are all his people.
nice.
um so so that's all I watched when I was a kid. Basically it was like, sneaking onto the couch when not sneaking behind the couch. When I was 13, I think I made it in front of the couch at
Okay,
this point, because when we talked about Indiana Jones, Temple of Doom I had to watch part of that from behind the couch,
mm-hmm, that makes
on the DL. But this I remember watching with my dad in our house. Like we probably rented it from a Blockbuster or something like that on a Friday night. And so I remember seeing this first movie, and I remember being pretty blown away by it. Like the twist that John Voight's character Phelps is actually the bad guy. I remember being
mm-hmm.
like shocked. I do remember as a 13-year-old being like, this is a very convoluted plot. Like I'm not totally sure I was with it the whole time. um but I liked it, but I was into it. And then that's it. Like I basically never watched any of the other movies at all until you and Greg were like, you've been sleeping on this. Where have you been? Like, you got to get on this. So I've now watched all 6 movies.
Huge.
Most of them I've seen the past week. Actually, I think 3. Well, wait, no, that's not. I would actually maybe even say most of them I've seen in the past like 4 days.
I mean, 3 3/4 of them you've watched over this past weekend. We're
Yes.
recording on a Monday.
Yeah. So I managed to watch 4, 5, and 6 over the weekend. Went back and rewatched 1 this morning, finished watching 2, and 3 was the one that I had started with way back when you and Greg were hassling
Mhm.
me about this. So that was a couple months ago. So like,
Has-
averaging, it averages out, but it's a pretty recent watch that I've just kind of blown through all of these movies. And I have to say, it's been great. It's been really fun.
I
I've
mean,
really enjoyed it. I get it now.
I'm glad, because I would feel really bad if you were like, eh. Like, so we scheduled a recording and you were just sort of like, I don't know, C plus. Okay, that's all I got. Thanks for listening. You can find me at Instagram. So yeah, that's a good. I'm glad that you liked it. I'm sorry that we hassled you. I think that there was some. My memory might be there was some surprise at the drafting of Mission colon Impossible dash Dead Reckoning, comma part 1 in our most anticipated movies, and you were just like, I don't know, and it was like, no,
I
you
had
should
zero
watch that.
anticipation because I had no reason to anticipate it.
Right. And then Greg got onto it and was just like, no, you should do that. And then to encourage you, I don't think this is overly oversharing. We can cut it out if it is. Over text, he can't join us because he's traveling in London, and but he sent text. He texted us photos he took of various locations that are in London where Mission Impossible scenes were filmed, which do
They're
credit to him
amazing.
on that. So
I love he was so committed to it that he even like framed them so they would match the composition
yeah,
of some of the shots. It's great. It's great work, Greg.
yeah, no, he knows the angles.
He needed to throw down his cred even though he couldn't be here. So he traveled to a foreign country and took a bunch of photos. Very very Ethan Hunt move,
Yeah.
I have to be honest. Um it's good stuff. It's been a whirlwind, but I've really enjoyed it. I'm really happy that I have now filled in this blind spot in my movie viewing. And in retrospect, I'm like, why? I was the whole time I was watching all these movies, I was trying to think, why did I not watch any of these? Like, why did I just not take the initiative, show any interest? Was it really just that like I missed one and then they just kind of piled up and I was like, oh, well, I have to go back and watch the earlier ones before I watch this one, and then that kind of snowballed into me never watching any of them.
Mm.
That could be it. But also I feel like I'm a huge James Bond fan. Less so, it's cooled a little bit in this phase of my life, but I feel like, I had a Tomorrow Never Dies poster on my wall in college. Like I was a big
Great movie.
Bond fan. It is a great movie. Yeah, see, like I knew Michelle Yeoh had the stuff even back then. And so maybe that's what it was I was like, oh, like this seems like a not as good, and I don't know why I thought that, not as good American version of James Bond, and so like I don't need to watch these. Like I feel like that might have been like the subconscious rationale.
I could see that. There is also like there's always kind of a gap in between these movies, so it's always sort of like, yeah, I guess those are movies. Like if you're not watching them or looking forward to them, they just sort of came out like a bunch of years ago, so they don't feel like, I don't know, as present if you're not up on them and rewatching them every 12 to 18 months, like smart people are. But I mean, where are you on Tom Cruise, like in general?
I'm right now pretty pro Tom Cruise.
Okay.
I mean, I think Top Gun Maverick had a big part in that, to be like, because I didn't have these movies in my consciousness, right? I didn't have the like, oh, Tom Cruise has still got it. He's doing crazy stunts, right? He's still being a charismatic movie star. Like, because I hadn't seen any of these movies until recently. I feel like Top Gun Maverick was kind of my go-to, and I don't know, like, yeah, I think there was a period where I was like, oh, what's going on with Tom Cruise? Like, this seems weird.
That's what I'm wondering, if like being
maybe
cool
that's what it was.
Being cool or indifferent to Tom Cruise would be like, well, I'm not going to go see these movies that every poster is just his face, and it's his franchise and he's always coming back. That like, if you're not into him, that or you're actively like against him, which I think we may discuss. There's reasons to feel that way. Then why would you feel compelled? to
Yeah.
go check it out.
I
But
feel like my Tom Cruise viewing dropped off probably after Jerry Maguire, I want to say.
hmm.
Because then it's just like a black hole. Like, I don't know. I can't remember any movies after that. But I will say that one of my favorite movies when I don't remember how old I was, younger, far and away, his movie, the Irish immigrant movie with Nicole Kidman.
Oh, I mean, just impeccable accent work from both of them in that movie.
I didn't know that as like a 12-year-old. Come on. Like, I wasn't attuned to accents. I don't know.
Yeah, my I've never seen that movie. The only review I have of that was my one of my grandfathers and his nephew, my mom's cousin, who was obviously younger, but they were both kind of fuddy duddy older men. Went to go see it because it was about the old country, and I don't think neither of them had gone to the movies in like 20 years at that
But
point,
that's what got them to
and they
go.
were not ready for like. I think like Nicole Kidman gets naked and there's like, I mean, there's some sort of sex scene and they were like appalled that like this was in like available mass entertainment. They were like, it's just pornography in the theater. And
I don't know if that's funny. I don't
and I
remember
was like
that.
14 and I was like, okay. I was like, I don't really want to hear you guys talk about this. But yeah, that's all I know about that movie is I remember seeing the trailer and even the trailer being like, these are not good Irish accents. This is an age difference thing. And then my grandfather didn't like it because it was too racy. And I've never been compelled to watch it. But now that I know that was your favorite, maybe I'll go back.
It was really good. So that's the influence of my mom. So my dad was there for me with the action movie blockbusters, and like we watched uh Chuck whatever Walker Texas Ranger. We used to watch that show all the time, and like whenever Sammo Hung had a spin-off show after that, that was a big part of our
that's
enjoyment
right.
viewing. And then all the Jackie Chan movies and every movie Arnold Schwarzenegger's been in and Jean-Claude Van Damme.
I mean,
Like,
this is all good stuff. I don't
so
know.
that was
There are no
that was what
problems here.
that was what my dad gifted me in terms of my movie formation. And then my mom gave me all the westerns and the old Hollywood musicals, and like she's a huge John Wayne fan, and I feel like Far and Away was part of the like her like frontier
Sure, that
movies,
makes sense.
kind of like yeah. And that's why it's funny, I don't remember any of the raciness from the movie. I just remember there's a scene where they're like someone's playing a fiddle and they're like dancing like river dancing basically.
That may be enough. Like I honestly don't know, but like they just didn't expect it, or at least my grandfather didn't expect it.
But that seems like such a bygone era, because that was when Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman were like a double billing. You know what I mean? Like, and that was so long ago. So anyway, we've gone off on a huge tangent.
Well, we have, but I think that since we're already sort of in this area, I wouldn't mind like tapping into a little bit of like the Tom Cruise arc, because I do think that
his persona as celebrity and a movie star, I think, has huge bearing on this franchise and these movies. It does.
And this is also like his baby and has been. I mean, again, it's not. I mean, it's a property that existed in the past, but like he was the one that was like, oh, this movie studio has the rights to Mission Impossible. I love Mission Impossible. The story of this franchise is littered with stories of Tom Cruise binging something and then that influencing what's going to happen. So he's like, I just used to watch the Mission Impossible movies all the time, or TV shows. Like I used to watch that and just tape it and just watch them over and over again. And so when he heard that they were available, he was like, I'm going to do this. It was the first movie that he produced with the production company that he formed with his agent. And it was like his thing. And like he handpicked the director and did all the like development. He had approval over the script and everything. So yeah, I mean, it's his baby and he's kept going forward. So I think, yeah, his sort of arc, I do think kind of plays into it. So, I mean, he has,
and I think I read somewhere that he wanted to do this partly so he could have control over his own career. Like it was like a very calculated move on his part to be like, if I'm a producer on this and I star in it, right, then it's my show.
Right. And yeah, he can sort of have final say on how he looks and the effectiveness of it. And there's a lot you can say about Tom Cruise, but like the man, he's a showman. Like he's like, I want to put on a show, and at least in terms of these movies, he's really good at it. It's you almost don't want to hand it to him, but I have to. So he's got like he starts in the early '80s, and he's got like a couple of years. I mean, it's this his filmography is crazy. He's got two movies before The Outsiders, which I feel like, I mean, he's not like the lead or anything, but he's in The
Oh
Outsiders
wow.
as one of the people. And then later that same year is Risky Business, which I mean, I think is certainly the initial star making turn. He's early 20s. He's 20. I think he's 20 when Risky Business comes out. He only 2 years after that is Legend, and then it's Top Gun, and he's off to the races. And so he has this sort of like it's not exactly like a one for them, one for me, but he sort of has like this very uh, calculating sounds negative, but I think like a very it seems smart approach to like what he
Strategic?
wants to do. Strategic. That sounds pretty good. Although also that there's a little menace, I feel like, behind the word strategic. But he's doing like this is a movie that will be big and popular, like Top Gun or Cocktail or Days of Thunder. But then he also like is alternating those with this is a movie with a director that has a lot of cachet and respect. So he does Color of Money with Martin Scorsese, and Rain Man with Barry Levinson, and Born on the 4th of July with Oliver Stone, Far and Away with your boy Ron Howard. I
Oh,
don't know
that's right. I
why
forgot that
he's
was a Ron Howard movie.
it's a Ron Howard joint. And then I mean then it starts to get like they're intersecting because it's like A Few Good Men is like the like tail end of Rob Reiner's peak of like every movie he does is great. And the Aaron Sorkin screenplay, but like that's also popular. The Firm is a popular movie, but it's also a Sidney Pollack directed that. So he's like I'm acting, I'm working with directors, I'm trying to get like successful movies with big filmmakers, and that that carries him into he does Interview with the Vampire, which is Neil Jordan at sort of close to the peak of Neil Jordan's power as a director, post The Crying Game, and a big book franchise IP, how they would not describe it back then. And then, like from all of that, is when he's like, I'm going to form a production company, and the first thing he's going to do is a Mission Impossible movie. And the same year he does the first Mission Impossible, he's also in Cameron Crowe's Jerry Maguire, a movie that's pretty good that people really like, and it's and including me. I don't mean to say that like I was being
Like
facetious.
those other people.
Pretty good. No, it's a very good movie, and so yeah, so it's this like he's like I'm starting a franchise. I'm still doing this director thing. Then things get weird for Tom Cruise. Two things happen according to his Wikipedia page. Now, Wikipedia, is it the best source? What is it? The rhetorical situation. Listen, kids, don't directly cite Wikipedia. You should go and find the original source. I didn't do that. I just looked at the Wikipedia page. But deep in Tom Cruise's Wikipedia page is something I'd never heard before, which is in the mid '90s, he was like, I'm going to leave Scientology. So he had become a Scientologist in the late '80s. And in the mid '90s, allegedly, according to some insider book, in the mid '90s was when he was told, so the secret of Scientology is there's aliens. And he was like, okay, goodbye. And he went to London with his wife, Nicole Kidman, and he spent over 2 years making Eyes Wide Shut with Stanley Kubrick, and was away from Scientology and was just in a movie about with his wife about a marriage that's completely falling apart, and just filming these scenes over and over and over and over and over again for Stanley Kubrick. And then when he came back, some people from Scientology had gone to visit him and talk to him, and he came back and he's like, I'm tripling down on Scientology. And Nicole Kidman was like, well, I'm out, and left. And so that's sort of a turn. He was still was doing, again, it took 3 years from Jerry Maguire for Eyes Wide Shut to come out. Magnolia comes out the same year, which is another very prominent performance. He's doing a supporting role. We'll talk later. Gets an Oscar nom for it. And then he's like, okay, Mission Impossible 2, which we'll discuss how that movie turned out. But he's working with John Woo, and there's a lot to say about that. And then
and that's in 2000, just to keep track of this timeline.
We're in 2000, and then the first half of the 2000s, he's kind of keeping on with what he's been doing. He's got another Cameron Crowe movie in Vanilla Sky. He works with Spielberg in Minority Report. He does like a couple of joke things. He's in Austin Powers, as I guess that's the one big joke thing. Then a Michael Mann movie in Collateral. He works with a director named Edward Zwick, who has done some things for The Last Samurai. That felt like another sort of Cruise Wagner production, which we can discuss the potential issues of like The Last Samurai, white guy Tom Cruise. That even in 2003, that wasn't landing very well. But yeah, Michael Mann in Collateral, and he's Spielberg again for War of the Worlds. Then things get weird. This is then in 2005.
Again.
Well, with War of the Worlds, it's the promotion for that is when he's like, I'm dating Katie Holmes and I'm totally in love with her. I'm jumping on couches on Oprah and I'm super excited. And it like, for some reason, the promotion for War of the Worlds is when a bunch of the media is like, so you're a Scientologist, like you're really against like psychiatry, huh? And he's like, oh yeah, I hate it. And he like every interview gets derailed with people being like, so why do you think like your friend Brooke Shields shouldn't have taken antidepressants? And he's like, it's because they destroy your mind. Like only Scientology is the way to fix any mental health problems. And like things are like fall apart. The Viacom pulls its funding from his production company. There's like I think a bunch of projects that sort of fall apart, and his career really shifts where Mission Impossible 3 comes out. And again, this is sort of my history of it was like Tom Cruise is crazy. Like you can't support him and his wacky beliefs about things. It's like not unsuccessful, but not as successful. I think it's the least successful of the 6 movies. And then it's kind of like he lays low for a little while. He does like a supporting role in a Robert Redford movie. His move was sort of to be in Tropic Thunder under a bunch of makeup in a true comedy role, which was it's a winner move because people were like, oh yeah, Tom Cruise, like he can do something really different. And then he starts sort of attaching himself to a few people, starting with Valkyrie in 2008, which was written by Christopher McQuarrie, and Christopher McQuarrie sort of becomes like his guy. He's like, this is going to be one of my guys. And then from that, he kind of gets a couple other directors, Doug Liman, who he does Edge of Tomorrow and American Made with in the 20-teens, and Joseph Kosinski, is that his name?
That's the Top Gun Maverick guy, right?
Yes, who also did Oblivion, which is a sci-fi movie from 2013. And every movie, so basically every movie he's done since Ghost Protocol has one of those 3 guys, if not multiple of them working on it. And he sort of is like, I'm recentering myself on this version of like, I'm Tom Cruise, movie star. He's kind of not really acting anymore. Like he's sort of just like a very charismatic stuntman who does like these big like action-y movies in like these big settings. And that's maybe underselling the performances he's giving in them. But it's just interesting that sort of like he's coming up, he does a stretch of like, I'm going to work with the biggest directors possible. I don't want to work with like all the big people. And now he's like, I'm just working with my guys and like, I can work with them. I know, like, we know how to communicate with each other. Whatever that means, it doesn't seem like any of those guys have to like bow to his will necessarily, but I guess like whatever his idiosyncrasies are, he's like, I know I can work with these people.
Right. They can collaborate successfully.
Right. So that was probably too long an overview of Tom Cruise's career.
It's fascinating though, because so much of especially the kind of bumps in the road that you talked about along the way, I feel like none of that is part of the current discourse when we talk about Tom Cruise. Right. And so it's from a PR perspective alone, he's a fascinating case study because somehow he managed to like bounce back and just like Men in Black, like flashy thing for all of us, right? So now all we remember is the really good Mission Impossible movies and the fact that he has saved the theatrical experience and is somehow single-handedly the savior of movie theaters.
Right.
And now he's posting like, I'll see you at the movies.
Right. And that he was very in favor of COVID protocols, and people should follow them.
Right.
Because he was yelling at people who were not doing that on the set of the upcoming Mission Impossible movie. Yeah, and I feel like there's only been more and more exposés and investigations and revelations around the Church of Scientology, and it's always clear in those where it's like, and one of their like biggest assets is Tom Cruise. He's not just like a famous person who is like, I love being a Scientologist. He's like, he goes and has gone and lobbied governments in Europe and in America, in the United States, to be like, you need to make sure you acknowledge this as a religion, give them tax exempt status, like get a bunch of benefits for them. Like, and he has allegedly a lot of people in their like enslavement organization, the Sea Org, that work for him at his mansions, and like he'll just be like, I want a new motorcycle, and like someone who has signed a $1 million contract, who gets paid no dollars a day, has to go out and like get him a motorcycle. So like he benefits greatly from this organization, and like the stories about the organization are not good, but he makes really good Mission Impossible movies. So it's just like, cool, man. Like, yeah, that's weird. Like, you're very weird. I don't know. But guess what?
We love these movies.
Your planes go zoom, and your motorcycles go vroom, and your legs go chug, 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 chug. And we're super happy.
And he does death-defying stunts on his own at the age of like 60, whatever, right? I feel like that's a big part of the story too. I think I went back and I listened to the Filmcast review. I didn't get through all of it, of Fallout, which was a while ago, right? This was 2018.
5 years
and
ago.
They were like, every single interview we've listened to and read indicates that Tom Cruise obsessively wants to make sure everyone knows that's him doing all those crazy stunts.
Yes.
Right. He makes a point to like, and like, I think this is like David, I think to be specific with my citation, I think it was David Chen saying that in an interview with Chris McQuarrie that he had read, McQuarrie was like, yeah, he's very particular about like, we need to have a close up so we can see his face. So, it's him, it's not a stunt man switcheroo. Right. And that it's like that he's very like adamant about like, no, they have to know it's me. To the point where it dictates sort of like the camera work in a lot of scenes. So I feel like that's also a part of the thing. He's now become known for the crazy actor, the crazy movie star, the last movie star who's still willing to like do his own stunts and defy death at every turn. Very much like in a way that echoes Ethan Hunt as a character. Because now I'm not going to remember. Maybe you can help me. I'm not going to. These all bleed together because I watched them all back to back.
Oh. Like, well, they didn't make 6 movies so much as they made one 12-hour movie.
Right. So maybe it's Mission Impossible 2, because that was the one that I watched the most recently. I think Ambrose, the villain in that, says something like there's a whole sequence where his voiceover is basically exposition for the mission. And he's like, because it's showing that he can predict everything that Ethan Hunt's going to do. And he says something like, and he's going to do some crazy thing where he jumps out of an airplane and risks his own life. It's like very much a meta commentary also about Tom Cruise, I feel like.
Which is Mission Impossible 2. Like, that's so early even then in it. But yeah, it was, I mean, yeah, the sort of write-ups of the first movie are, Cruise being like, and then we're setting it up, and then I'm supposed to be replaced by a stuntman, and I'm like, no. Like, when like they dumped like 80 gallons of water on him from what's supposed to be like an exploding fish tank, like the director was like, he could have drowned, but like he wanted to do it, so we just did it and sprayed a bunch of water on him. And they, I don't think they actually had him on a moving train, but they did have a machine blowing like 90-mile-an-hour winds on him. So yeah, that was all the way back in the second movie in Mission Impossible 2. And that's early enough in the franchise, and certainly sort of in the middle, and before he was having the that trajectory of sort of shunning from society. So that was always part of what he did. Was I'm the person doing all these stunts even from the first movie, but now it's so core to his movie star persona, and also central to the sort of selling point of these movies, is that like it's death defying stunts and amazing action, and like what crazy set pieces there are, that that's what these are sold on. That's why they're successful. Top Gun Maverick was similar, of like they're really up in the planes, and you'll see them in the planes. It's not just like they're sitting in front of a blue screen somewhere, like they're really doing this. And the movies that he's made in the last 10 years, maybe even 15 years, that don't have that element have not really been successful. Your Oblivion, Edge of Tomorrow, The Mummy, and American Made. I mean, these are, some of those are good movies. Some of them are also The Mummy. And there's certain reasons, many reasons why they could have not been successful. But I do think that like people are like, I'm here for Tom Cruise. If it's possible, he could die making this movie for me.
No, yeah, I think you've really pinpointed it, and that's what has made this franchise stand out, at least in the current discourse on movies and kind of what the state of the movie industry is right now, right? That like Tom Cruise and through the Mission Impossible franchise is doing something that nobody else is doing. He's kind of going against the grain, right? The trend is like, oh, we have all this technology, let's use it, right? And then critics are complaining about bad VFX and how it looks too CGI and too fake, right? And like Tom Cruise is over here being like, nope, I'm just a dude jumping out of a helicopter. Right? And people will pay to see that.
Take me up to the top of the atmosphere and let me jump out with a parachute.
Yes.
I'll just do that a bunch of times.
Over and over again in every movie.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's so we've started talking about sort of what the secret sauce of this franchise is and kind of like what makes it so successful. Because I do agree that it's like when I was doing light research for this today, like anticipation of our recording, I was trying to just find like, like a good meaty, like thought piece on like what makes the Mission Impossible franchise tick. All I could find were like, Mission Impossible is the best action franchise. Here's why Mission Impossible is better than everybody else. Like, here's why. It was just people just overtly praising this franchise and saying like, this is it. This is what's good about movies right now.
Well, Jen, here's your problem. It doesn't tick. It's a fuse. That's right. Just
sorry
fizzles. But no, that's fair. I mean, maybe this has to be on the Long Take Substack is where this has to be explored. That can be where this article could be found sometime in the future. But yeah, it is interesting that people. It feels the critical acclaim for it has only grown. The box office, I think, I don't know fully between Ghost Protocol and Rogue Nation, but like these have been very successful, and the anticipation grows, it feels like, for each one. So, given that, there's not a lot of sort of unpacking why. I wonder if there's some sort of, and I'm going to say, I think it's Latin and I don't know how to say it. It's like the sui genre. Like, how do you say that? I only write it. But it's just this unique thing of this, like, yeah, well, it's Tom Cruise and the man's insane. And they make these movies and that's also insane. Like what? Like who else is going to do that? Like they're good. Like don't ask any questions about it.
But what else is contributing to that is my question. Cause I think off mic, you mentioned that they've really found a formula that works. So yes. What is that formula? Like, what are all the component parts of this franchise?
I mean, I do think, as someone who loves these movies, they're not like fundamentally that different from movie to movie. It's always like, we're the IMF, we're this team, we have to do something. I think that individually or collectively, they are disavowed by the government in every movie. And it's to like make their way back in. And, easy sort of spy movie things of like they travel the globe, they have this different technologies, and these different settings. So all that is pretty standard. I do think, not to overemphasize the Tom Cruise of it, there is something in the character of Ethan Hunt that just feels so much like how what we know about Tom Cruise, where he is just like, I know what to do and I know that I'm the one to do it. And I don't really know how I'm going to, but I'm going to figure it out and I'm going to be very intense and I'm going to like just make it work. And like, if I don't know what to do, I'm just going to like run at something, or I'm just going to like start like doing it and I'll just figure it out. And, you know, it really like dovetails well with the positive things about Tom Cruise, like in a way that like, you know, like those same elements came across very negative for a while in his public persona. So I think that there is something there where it's like it's taking things that we can like about him and putting it into the character, and like they reflect back and forth off each other. And the other element I'll say is I do think there's been a pivot in it. I mean, I don't think this, I know this. There's been a pivot from this was a you know, they would get like a prestige or at least like prominent director, different director for each movie. And like each installment would be like, this is this director's version of Mission Impossible starring Tom Cruise. And so it's Brian De Palma at first, and it's John Woo, and then J.J. Abrams and Brad Bird in his first live action movie. And, you know, it was sort of just like, this is what each of them are like. And they're sort of independent apart from the fact that there's the accoutrement around Ethan Hunt, Tom Cruise's character. But then starting with Ghost Protocol, which is the Brad Bird movie, they started, like he had Christopher McQuarrie that came in sort of in the middle of shooting or early in shooting they were like, we don't know what's happening with the script. Like the script's not good, which I think has been true on all of these movies where they're like, they just are like, we got to hit a release date. We're just going to start shooting the movie. We'll figure out what the actual like story is later, which is probably not a good formula for most movies, but works for these. And I think Christopher McQuarrie is particularly good. Like his skill set amongst, you know, his other skills that he has is he's very good at taking a collection of things he has to include and ideas that other people have had and being like, what is the most streamlined and effective story from all of these pieces? And, you know, there's something interesting that like he got his first success and an Academy Award for the very sort of puzzle box Usual Suspects movie. A great movie that it's hard to recommend because of the director and star, but it is a great movie. And Ed holds up if you can get past those two people. But like, you know, he's very good. That's sort of that puzzle box element. And it kind of feels like these movies are puzzle boxes to him, starting with Ghost Protocol when he had these things other people had done, and now the last two and presumably these next two that he's worked on, the way that he's talked about making them, which there were and I guess there I think still are somewhere out there, these extended interviews he did with the Empire podcast, which is Empire magazine, a film magazine from England, and I think they're behind some sort of a paywall now. I don't know exactly where, maybe they are now available on the Empire website. But he did one for Rogue Nation and one for Fallout. The Rogue Nation one, I think, was almost 3 hours, and the Fallout one was across 2 episodes, close to 6. And it's just like him talking and answering a bunch of questions from them about
he's even got us beat. That's amazing.
I know. About how he makes these movies, and the way he talked about it. And I'm doing this from memory because they went behind a paywall. And as I was trying to Google, like, what's Christopher McQuarrie's process? I just kept seeing Dead Reckoning articles, and I was like, I'm not reading these because I don't know if it's going to give anything away. The crucial plot development of the Mission Impossible series. But I don't want to hear.
There are twists.
There are twists.
There's always twists in his movies.
I want to be surprised, even though I did watch an 8-minute behind the scenes featurette like 6 months ago about a motorcycle stunt, but because they put it out online and I watched it like 4 times. But you know, that when they talk about making the movies, is that there's sort of 2 initial steps. Is you know, like he talks to Tom and he works well with Tom, and they're like, we're gonna do another Mission Impossible movie, and it's like, yeah, and they go to. First they talk with each other and they're like, what are the things we want to do? And it's basically like, what are the set pieces? So stuff like, I want to hang on the side of a plane while it takes off. And I want to do a helo jump from, you know, basically the upper edge of our atmosphere, and parachute down on that. Like, I want to do a motorcycle chase through Paris. Whatever, like all the sort of like things that I'm going to do an underwater. I want to hold my breath underwater for 5 or 6 minutes. You know, and so talk about that and they kind of sketch it out. And they go to the studio and they say, what do you need to be in a Mission Impossible movie that you want to put in a trailer to sell this movie? Like, give us a list of 6 things. And he was just like, it's always like a car chase and, some sort of crazy stunt, which we're already working on, a woman in a ball gown or some sort of like attractive dress, and, like 2 or 3 like cool looking cities from like our locations around the world. And they're like, great, we will do all of that for this amount of money. Don't talk to us again. And then the studio is like, great. And then they say they agree, and they go off and they develop the stunts, and they take like a couple of years building up the stunts, and then they keep like messing around with the story, and they basically usually figure the story out when they're editing the movie, because this, they're just like, I don't know, there's like a thing and someone's got to get the thing and who knows what the thing is. And they just kind of figure it out. And that's should be terrible. That should totally fall apart. But for some reason, when it's Christopher McQuarrie, like, manipulating the story, and Tom Cruise driving it, and the supporting cast, which we will get into, that they have built up, and the ways in which these movies that across the first 3, the 4th one starts having some interconnected elements, but they really start to build up across these last couple, the ones written and directed by McQuarrie, or co-written and directed by McQuarrie, really start to sort of create tendrils that wrap around all of the movies to have a narrative consistency and sort of story moving through. And so there's something satisfying about that, of like, yeah, I do remember that thing from the first movie. And also, like, there's this cool stunt. And also, he does a good job of making somehow the MacGuffin, like, chase of what is going on and the double crosses that are unfolding all clear enough that like they make sense and they're thrilling. And when there's things that don't really make sense, you don't care, because it's like, okay, well, whatever,
right,
like
it's not
something cool's happening,
right? You're not distracted trying to figure out what's going on,
right,
at any point. And so
which may be a problem in the first couple of movies.
Well, so the process you're describing as I'm listening to it, I think, is a reflection of a clear understanding of the creators, right? So like McQuarrie, Tom Cruise, whoever it is, right? It's understanding of the genre and what makes the genre entertaining and appealing. Mm-hmm. Because the main thing when I was doing this binge of all these movies, it's the timing of it is right as Secret Invasion is the Marvel show is happening, and that was pitched as Marvel but a spy thriller. And I know you haven't seen that, so I'm not gonna go into any detail about what's happening. But I've been struggling with that show, and I'm like, what is it? Like, there's something that's off about this. There's something that's not working. Every time I do my written reviews every week, which you can find at thelongtake.substack.com.
Please like and subscribe.
I've been wrestling with like, what is it that it feels weird to me and doesn't feel quite right about this? And I think once I started really getting deep into this Mission Impossible watch, made me realize, they're trying to do Mission Impossible, but they're totally misunderstanding what makes it work. And so what I mean by that is that in the Mission Impossible movies, the story is there, the story is clear. And from a character arc perspective, usually, for Ethan Hunt, like usually it's simple but compelling, right? There's the stakes are very clear and they're high, right? And that, like, for him, it's like, it's the mission or someone he cares about, right? Like, and like, that's a really simple premise, but it's always very compelling, right? And I feel like, but it's always prioritizing what's fun and exciting about these movies, right? Which is all the spy craft, right? Mm-hmm. The like, it's not about what they're chasing. It's about how they're going to chase it. Mm-hmm. Right. It's not about, it doesn't matter who the villain is and what they care about, though we get that. Right. But it's more about like, how is Ethan Hunt going to outsmart them? Right. Mm-hmm. Like, it's all about the how and not the what. And so I feel like that's something that Secret Invasion has misunderstood. And part of that probably is because it also has to kind of fit into the MCU. And so it's kind of like, we want to make a spy thriller, but we also got to do all this other stuff. And that's sort of like pulling them away from what really would make the show exciting and fun as a spy thriller. Because like, they're just not doing very much spy stuff. Like, it's like, and that's all I'll say about it, because I know you haven't seen it, and a lot of people listening to this probably haven't seen it. But that's what clicked into place for me. I was like, like the genius of these movies, when they're really cooking, is the like cleverness of these action sequences and how over the top they are, and then it knows exactly in terms of pacing. Like that was the thing that blew me away, is like the pacing of a lot of these movies are so good, where like it's like boom 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 relentless action, and then like a really well placed but short, right, doesn't overstay its welcome character beat of like,
Mm-hmm.
the supporting the team being like, oh Ethan, no, like you can't do that, and him being like, I'm gonna do it, right, and then like
The only people
and
I trust are in this room. We can't
yes,
tell anybody else.
even we see it in the trailer for Dead Reckoning already, right, like his
Mm-hmm.
version of that in that trailer is, my life is always going to matter less than all of yours, right? And they're like, it can't matter less than Ving Rhames is like, it can't matter less than the mission or whatever, like,
Right.
or can't matter more than the mission. So like, yeah, it's like, but it never feels redundant or repetitious across the movies,
Yeah.
right? And I feel like I have a more acute, probably, sensation of that because I'm watching them all back to back. So I'm noticing like, oh, okay, like he always has to have that moment where they're like, you're crazy, but I'm gonna do it, right? Like, but it works every time. And so yeah, I think just a really good understanding, it's like what is going to get people to watch these movies and enjoy them and not worry too much about, right, none of these movies are going to get Oscar nominations for a screenplay, because it's just like, it's pretty, other than the double crossing and the like, oh, this person wasn't what they seemed, which even then is like a trope, right? There has to be always a character who like isn't who they claim to be or isn't who they seem to be, I feel like, in almost everyone. But that, so that's not innovating in general, right? It's not super complex or philosophical, right? But it works, it's functional in this context. And so I think that's, yeah, they're not like overthinking it, I think, is part of the charm of these movies.
It's almost like the fact that they like, I think this was a image that McQuarrie used. It sticks out in my mind, or at least I've heard it, and it relates to it, is like you jump off the cliff and you build the plane on the way down, where like they're just sort of like, we'll figure it out when we get there, and then it's like, whatever it is that works once we've done the things that we have done, we'll make that happen. And yeah, it's not going to be great drama that moves you to the.
But they're still aware they have to do that, right? Like a lot of action movies, I'm not going to call anyone out specifically, but a lot of action movies are like, oh, because we're an action movie, we don't have to actually like put any effort into all the other stuff.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, I think I would, my dad would hate this, but like most Steven Seagal movies, I feel like, right? It's all the set pieces and all one-liners and no connective tissue, no, like, I don't know, like there's not much else. Maybe that's just like a bad
No,
like
I haven't really. Right.
Okay. I haven't watched a Steven Seagal movie in forever, like since I was a kid, probably. So, but like everyone know, like even if the specific reference I use doesn't land with you, like I'm sure you've seen an action movie where like, oh, like people probably call them like dumb action movies, right? Which is not charitable, but like what they're referring to is that it's all action, no plot, no character, no story.
Right. Well, and the thing that, like, the parallel that always kind of exists for me, I shouldn't say always, but like comes to mind, are the Fast and Furious movies, where, because I'll watch like a trailer for that, and I've seen a couple of them, like when they got like crazy in the middle, and I'm just sort of like, these are dumb, but they're kind of fun. And then I was like, oh, okay, I've seen enough. And now they've made like a bunch more, and I'll know people are just like, these movies are not good. Like, why do folks still like go into them? And it's like, but are they fundamentally different than the Mission Impossible movies in terms of like, quote unquote, how dumb they are? And there's certainly a message that they're always talking about family in the Fast and Furious movies. Like they're trying to sort of have these characters with some sort of arcs and connections to each other. But I don't know, for some reason, maybe it's just because it's, more focused on spying and spycraft and that technology and wearing masks and all of that, that just appeals to me more. Maybe it's the way that they have sort of the characters. They do, I do kind of feel like the Fast characters revolve around Vin Diesel now, but the characters all kind of revolve around Tom Cruise, but they do sort of ebb and flow and change their opinion of him. And, there is a sort of found family element without it being called out so much. I don't know, but yeah, it feels like they're walking a tightrope of this could all fall apart. This is a house of cards that could just stop working, but it hasn't yet.
Right.
It does kind of
And if anything, it has gotten better over time. Like, so what was really valuable for me to listen to as you're kind of laying out the timeline of this franchise and of Tom Cruise and kind of how it fits into his career, I feel like that shift from each movie's kind of hodgepodge, different director, like different style, once it locks into the Chris McQuarrie stretch, and maybe that's because like he's in sync with Tom Cruise, right? There's could be a lot of things contributing to that. But to me, I also see it as it's coinciding with the movies getting more and more about the team surrounding Ethan Hunt than just Ethan Hunt himself. So if you think about the very first movie, it's like a man against the world, right? He does technically assemble a team that still includes Ving Rhames, right? Like MVP of this franchise, Ving Rhames, who I'm pretty sure is in. Has he missed any of them?
no.
He's in every single one, isn't
It's
he?
a cameo in Ghost Protocol. Like he's only in the last like 2 minutes,
Right.
but
But
he's
that
there.
counts.
He's in
Yeah,
all
he's
of
there.
them. Him and Tom Cruise are the only two.
So like technically Ethan Hunt assembles a team, but it's still very much, the movie is still very much centered on him against everybody else, against the John Voight character, against the CIA, right? Trying to outsmart everybody. It's him against the world. And I feel like the more it kind of, with every movie, it gets closer and closer. And I think it really hits its stride with Ghost Protocol of like, and there might even be explicit lines about him being like, we're a team. This works because we're a team. Like, I feel like he literally says that at the end of the movie when they're all sitting around the table drinking beers after the mission's over, and they're all like, yeah, we did it, right? He's like, no, it's all of you. But I feel like there's some secret sauce that kind of flows at that point, because Tom Cruise as Ethan Hunt, as charismatic and as like confident as his performance is, he's very much like a serious man taking himself seriously.
Right.
And so I feel like building this team around him makes him a more compelling character, right? Because it's giving him people to care about, right? And that's part of the character's charm, is that like, and they really lean into this in the later films, I think, where a lot of characters are like, no, like, you always have to put one person above saving millions, right? And he's like, I'm not going to change. He's like, no, like that's, and some characters, right, like the Alec Baldwin character is like, that's a good thing. He comes around and he's like, no, that's a good thing. Like that's what makes you one of the best agents, is that you're always going to look after your team, right? But the sense is that's what makes him special or like unusual as a secret agent, right? Is that he like cares about people, right? And so I feel like the more it shifts towards that kind of dynamic, I think the more successful the movies are, because it's also like he's the straight man and people are playing off him, right? Especially Simon Pegg and Ving Rhames and like those the recurring team members that keep coming back.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. The thing I'll add to it is the movies also, and this is to the credit of Cruise and probably to a degree McQuarrie as well, and the other actors, like they don't shy away from Ethan like losing fights or not achieving his goal. Like they'll win in the end, but like over the course of the movie, it's not like I need to always be like the alpha prime winner on top of every scenario, and they're willing for that, and they're willing for like to have the character be sort of mocked or at least kind of questioned by the people around him, where it's just like, you're going to go off and do something crazy, aren't you? And he's like, what are you talking about? Yes. Or like, I promise you I will not.
I'm the only one who can do it.
I promise you I will not let that happen. Well, how are you going to do that? I'm working on it. Like I'll figure that out. Which, again, is not like groundbreaking, but it's very possible that a movie set up with like one performer having so much power could very easily have the movie be like, well, I don't want to look weak like that. I don't want that. Or like someone came up with a good line, like that's my line now. Like I want to say that. My character should be the one that does, whatever. So, it's to the credit that like the ensemble is given so much to do, and they are playing off of Cruise or slash Ethan, and also that Ethan is allowed to sort of look as foolish as he does sometimes, and I think that's pretty that's pretty central, because then that makes it not seem like he's this big weirdo who has to be in control of everything, which again is like the potential like downside of Tom Cruise, the persona. So I think they've really tapped into again presenting who we sort of think he is, of channeling it through this character in all the
Mm.
good ways and all the best ways to get us like right there on board.
It also positions him as the antithesis to James Bond, because that was the other comparison I kept making while I was watching this. I'm like, well, why? What is this franchise doing that's different than Bond? What is making it compelling, right? Because I said it at the top of the show, like maybe my subconscious assumption was like, well, I have Bond, I don't need another spy franchise, right? So as I was watching it, I was like, okay, what is going to draw someone to this that doesn't draw them to Bond? And I feel like it's this idea of he's always going to make the choice to save somebody he cares about, as opposed at the expense of the mission, right? Because I think Bond historically is about the sort of tragedy of he's just a number, he's not a person,
Mhm.
right? And he's lonely, and he's never made any human connections with anybody, right? Obviously, depending on which Bond, that goes up and down, but like, that's always the problem, is that like he's like, no, I'm just this cold, killer, right? And and what is the cost? Like the best Bond movies, I think, take a peek into like what is he lost, what is his soul kind of lost in the process of that, right? Whereas that's not what this is about at all. Right? Like,
In a way, it's soul regained. Like he keeps kind of, clawing more and more humanity back, and then sometimes has to give it up. Like he's not allowed to be married, but he's still tracking, monitoring the safety of his wife, and he's protecting all the people around him. Yeah, so that's interesting. I hadn't thought of that. How different, fundamentally different it is, of the sort of license to kill versus, trying to save those around him.
right. And they take this and explicitly like make it into a line, because I feel like Henry Cavill's character at some point is like, isn't it like your mission, should you choose to accept it, you choose to do this, right? Like, and then they also are like, he tried to get out of the game, but he can't help, he needs to save the world, like he needs to be helping and protecting people, and that's why what pulls him back in. And so I feel like this idea of like he always chooses to accept his mission because that's just who he is a big part of the character, in a way that like it's with Bond is basically just like a pawn of MI6 kind of, and that's sort of like a sad reality a lot of the time. Not for every movie, but like, that's the stereotype of the character.
Yeah. I will just say, in terms of other comparisons, the other one I'll put out there, because I think of these movies as being like dad movies, and specifically it's like my dad movies, because like he loves spy stories and all of that, and I have seen 3 of them, I think, with him, and only the third time was Fallout. I was visiting home when it came out, and we went to the big IMAX screen, where if Greg were here, he would definitely know. That's in the furniture store in Reading, Massachusetts, at
Jordan's
Jordan's Furniture. Yeah. And I was just like, it's a new Mission Impossible movie, Dad, we gotta go. And like after that one, he was just like, yeah, these movies are crazy. Like they're just like crazy. Like he wants Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, which is like another like very spycraft. Like he wants Slow Horses, the Gary Oldman
right.
show.
It's mostly people talking in small rooms.
Yeah, and like
with dusty books.
And it's interesting because it was obviously very like sort of tech heavy still, but in my reading up of the original TV show, it was more in line with that, of like it was like a procedural. It had the sort of like, it opened a certain way every week. They had like certain steps, and then they would be like, okay, how are we going to manipulate this person into putting themselves in a compromising position or giving up the information or whatever, and not a ton of like action necessarily. So I think that there is, in the same way that there were folks who to sort of pull the J.J. Abrams of it into the center, there were folks that when the Abrams, Chris Pine, Zachary Quinto Star Trek trilogy came out, they were just like, what the hell is this? Like Star Trek is about like exploring and talking, and there's fights sometimes, but like it's a lot of sort of mental acuity and kind of like characters positioning things, and he made it like a whiz bang Star Warsy action adventure movie. And I think that there are some people, maybe my dad, certainly members of the cast of the original TV series, who are like, you took something that was kind of smart and you made it this big dumb action movie, and that's the core flaw. And so, I'm just pointing out that there's, there is a sort of comparison with the Bond movies, which are also very actiony. There's also potentially, the like, oh, and there's all the spycraft that they do. That there's certain people like my dad who are like, not enough spycraft. Like, need to spend more time going through files. I need to spend more time in a room, in a meeting, like having a conversation about what we should do and trying to size up who's being double crossed by whom in that one room. And car chases are overrated, and motorcycle jumps off of the side of a mountain are a waste of time. So that's just another potential look, if that's what you're looking for in a spy franchise. This may be too adrenaline based.
But I mean, it's still, that part of it's still there. There's just less paperwork to go with it, because I feel like there's always a moment where Ethan figures out something and then has to kind of like keep it to himself and like then be 3 steps ahead of the other person or something, like, right? Like, I mean, maybe it's just, I'm just thinking of the first one, right? Because there's a moment where he opens the Bible from the hotel that John Voight's character mentions, right? And then that something clicks, and then he has to kind of like reformulate an entire plan. And so I feel like there's a lot of planning and strategizing. There's just not a lot of literal paperwork in these movies. It's too digitized.
I agree. I love them. I was just pointing that out there. And I also wanted to bring in that the original cast at least hated the first movie, and presumably continue to hate them, mostly because there's only one named character that moved forward, which was the Peter Graves character, who ends up being the bad guy. Right. And they asked him to play the role, and he's like, no, I'm not going to be the guy who is the bad guy at the end of this movie. I've played this character for like 8 years on TV, and he's a good guy. Like, what are you doing? And then they all got pretty mad.
Yeah, it blew my mind, because I think this was on one of the Wikipedia pages that I was looking at, that it's considered because I was really, my knee-jerk reaction was to call the movie franchise a reboot. But technically, the first Mission Impossible movie takes place, it's like events 6 years after the 80s TV series. And so I'm like, why did we didn't need to do that? You know what I mean? Like, and so it's interesting to also think about this in a historical context in terms of IP franchise filmmaking, because the 90s were like pretty early for that kind of stuff. Like, it wasn't quite like it is now, right? I would say it's like pretty early, but to even see then that there was this insecurity that like, no, we have to make this like a continuation of something people love, but then also change it in a way that people hate it.
Right. Well, it felt like that was chosen entirely to, like, in the sort of meta marketing way of like, no, we're not starting the story over. We're carrying the character of Jim Phelps forward into this, and so that way, like, no one would suspect he's the bad guy. So it would be a really effective twist. Which, it's weird because now it's just people are like, who the hell's Jim Phelps? Like, this isn't, I don't know who that is.
That's the thing. It's like, nobody.
And the people who cared were mad. So, it was sort of, it was the opposite of like, the fan service filmmaking choices that one may see these days, where it's like, we got to make sure the Twitter and Reddit reactions are positive. This was more like 2 double middle fingers from Tom Cruise, Robert Towne, and Brian De Palma to the people who, quote unquote, beloved the characters from the original series. They were just like, we don't care.
But also very much in keeping with what was on trend in the 90s in terms of tone, right? Like, of like, oh, we're going to make the guy you thought is the good guy, who's old, the bad guy, right? Like, I don't know.
Well, and again, an interesting sort of note, and I don't think he quite got to Christopher McQuarrie levels, but the first 2 movies are written by Robert Towne, who wrote Chinatown and The Last Detail and Shampoo in the 70s, and had that sort of noir, sardonic sensibility that would be like, yeah, your hero is like a sucker, or your hero will turn when like things are no longer going his way, and the good guys become the bad guys is not uncommon for his worldview.
Should we start ranking these movies?
I think
Are we
so.
there?
I think we
Yeah.
are. We put a lot of things in the notes. The document, because it's just the two of us this week, just became us basically texting in a Google Doc where
Yes.
we were like in different fonts going back and forth. And
We're
I
like,
don't,
hey, did you know this? Like, oh
yeah,
wow.
like, oh wow. Just to, because this is a note I put here. I already sort of talked about it's evolving from different directors each movie as like a core part of the franchise to being the McQuarrie and Cruise thing. That the Tom Cruise again wanted to do a Mission Impossible movie because he loved watching Mission Impossible and would binge watch it. Back way before that was a term, binge watching, but he just would watch it a lot. And the story he tells, is it apocryphal? I don't know. But like he tells it is he used to live up the street from Steven Spielberg again in like the early 90s. So this is like post Rain Man, like Born on the 4th of July, Far and Away era Tom Cruise. Used to go over to Steven Spielberg once or twice a week and just hang out and talk movies. And they'd have dinner and they would just talk about movies because they just love doing that. And one night, Brian De Palma was there because he was hanging out with Steven Spielberg and they talked. And Tom Cruise was like, like Brian De Palma knows a lot about movies. And he kind of says it as if he had never like heard of Brian De Palma before. But he's like, that night I went home and I watched every Brian De Palma movie. I stayed up all night and I watched it until the like next afternoon. And then I called like my agent and was like, we're hiring Brian De Palma. He has to do the Mission Impossible movie. And similarly, he hired J.J. Abrams because he had watched the first 2 seasons of Alias in like a couple of weeks. And so
Wow.
it's the binge watch to job
Right.
offer pipeline.
So you need to get on Tom Cruise's TV screen
Yes.
is like the takeaway from this.
How
do you hack into his Netflix account?
The other thing I'll add from the sort of director camaraderie group is, according to Wikipedia, a totally reliable source you should always use. There was in the original screenplay, and maybe even when it was shot, a clear emphasis on a plot line in the first movie of a love triangle with Tom Cruise and Jon Voight and Jon Voight's wife, played by a French actress whose name I can't remember or pronounce when I did remember it. And that's sort of implied in the movie. That's sort of heavily like hinted that at least Tom Cruise was sort of interested in
I'd say
in
it
the
was
wife.
more than heavily.
Well, I guess more time was spent on it, and they took it out because George Lucas said this is too much, and it's going to distract from it's going to make the plot too confusing because we're going to be thinking about this in addition to all the double crosses. So in the same way that Brian De Palma rewrote the crawl for the original Star Wars movie because he thought the version George wrote was terrible, George streamlined the first Mission Impossible movie for Brian because they added too many subplots to it.
Oh, that's crazy. Yeah, I guess you're right. It is that final scene where those tensions, like there's subtle tension all throughout the movie between the wife, I think is her name Claire,
Sounds
and
right.
the character, not the actress. I don't remember the actress's name, and Ethan. And then in the final scene, right, arguably Jon Voight turns and shoots. I mean, I'm saying this because I just watched this morning. He turns and shoots her. I interpreted it as because she's like begging him not to kill Ethan. And so she's like, oh, you like him now? Like, forget you.
Yeah.
I'll just take all the money for myself. Right. Like he gets jealous. And that was my read on the scene. And so like, so interesting that all got, that was a much bigger thing. And that just all got concentrated into one.
Yeah. Well, and there
scene.
is like, cause it's allegedly, and it's unknown when people know he's not, but for a bunch of the movie, the audience at least thinks that the Jim Phelps character is dead. And then Tom Cruise and the wife, the actress's name is Emmanuelle Béart, Beart, and she's French. So apologies to Emmanuelle and everyone who speaks French in the world that I'm not pronouncing that correctly. But that like she's a widow and they're sort of like they're together, so they're always sort of near each other. And there's like a couple times like she kisses him on the cheek and they like fall asleep like in the safe house, like sitting against a wall next to each other. But it definitely isn't like an explicit they are together
right
now.
She doesn't seduce him or some point or
right or vice versa.
Yeah.
And although there is some weird Brian De Palma politics, not politics, but like sexual politics, when she first shows up and Tom Cruise is just sort of like, how did you get here? And he's like
Yeah, that
holding her
scene
down in a
is
bed.
not good. Not
It
good.
had real kind of Dress to Kill vibes of like, oh, Brian, are you okay with women? Is this all right for you? Like, are you good? You good, bro? But you know,
Okay, so we've started talking at least about the first movie in specific
sorry.
enough terms. I think we need to start getting into our rankings because that will allow us to kind of like freely talk about some of these movies specifically. So we're gonna count down 6-1. We'll just kind of go back and forth. I have a feeling we're gonna be pretty. Well, I'm gonna predict. We'll see that we're gonna be pretty similar. I think we'll be pretty similar.
In the interest of generally mixing things up, and also because you have more recently exposed to almost all of these, I'm going to motion that you go first
Okay.
in sharing your numbers.
I'm okay with it. So my number 6 is Mission Impossible 2. I know there's a lot of John Woo love, and people, there, you know, every once in a while there's a person who pops up who's like, I know this one's not really the best, but I really love it. And there's some fun stuff in it. There's some cool stuff in it, especially like I feel like the mountain climbing scene at the very beginning really sticks with me, and then comes back again in Fallout when he's climbing up the side of the mountain to get the detonator. And so that was nice. Like I like that. But the like and you just told me what she goes by now, formerly known as Tandy Newton. Tandyway?
Yes.
That's what she goes by now?
Tandyway.
Tandyway. Okay.
She brought the W back.
Her character is just so problematic and just totally underuses her as an actress. And like the triangle between Ethan and her and Ambrose the villain is just really icky because he's like, I love you, but I'm going to send you to your ex-boyfriend who was abusive clearly. And like, but you get back in there and you have no sit. Like, even though you don't want to do this, you have to do this. Like I was not comfortable with a lot of the dynamics at play.
Yeah.
There. And so I couldn't really get past that. So that's why this is my least favorite one.
I'm with you. This is also my least favorite. I would say this is the only movie in this series that's not good. Like there's things that are good, sure. Like, and because John Woo is a very good director. Time has been kind to some of the John Woo flourishes. Because I remember seeing it in the theater like opening weekend, and John Woo had been making movies in America for 5, I think, years. Like a Broken Arrow, like was 94, 95, I think was the first one. And you know, as little film nerd me, had been like, I'd seen The Killer. Like I was like, yeah, watch some of the Hong Kong movies, but like his stuff was known enough that when things like A Flock of Doves flew out of a little side door in an underground lair, like people laughed. When there was a lot of slow-mo like sequences of like people spinning around with guns, people were just kind of like, okay, like we get it, like we've seen this before. Like it was too kind of old hat, and it was kind of trying to take some of that aesthetic and put it onto this franchise. And I think, you know, again, time has served well because it's no longer like so current that like you're kind of happy to see it again. But it's still kind of, you know, it just feels a little tacked on. I think you got to the core of it. The dynamic between the characters is pretty icky. This, I mean, I was casting aspersions on Brian De Palma, which I think is fair. May also have to cast some aspersions on Robert Towne, who writes these movies with these women. You know, not great. Not maybe not the best representation of it, and a real waste of Anthony Hopkins as. I don't know if he was the secretary of IMF, but he's like the sort of mission commander. And he's in an uncredited cameo, and he shows up and you're just like, this is awesome. Anthony Hopkins is the guy who's like giving the mission. It's great. And like mostly what he does is just be like, women are dumb and all they're good for is sleeping with. And so have her use her body. Anyway, goodbye. And it's just like, oh no, Anthony, like what's happening? Like, what are we doing here?
Brendan Gleeson also grossly underused in this movie. He's basically just like sweaty in a hospital bed for most of it, or carrying a briefcase and not saying anything. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, and the other thing too is like, I guess the way I would rationalize it in terms of the development of Ethan Hunt over time is that, like, because I think between 1 and 2, his character feels just a lot more like smarmy than it will later. Like, because I feel like the Ethan Hunt in Mission Impossible 2, I'm like, Fallout Ethan Hunt is going to think you are way sloppy. Like, yeah. Like, what are you doing?
Right.
Like,
well, and to some of the points you were making earlier, this is also the least team based. Like, there's not really a team. Like, he's got Tanduay's character he's working with, and Luther is there, and he does some work towards the end. It's been like I did a full rewatch of
he's
all
the guy
these
in
movies.
The chair at the end.
Yeah, I did a full rewatch of all these movies a couple of years ago. This is the movie. It's been the longest. When I last did a rewatch of all these over the last few months, I skipped 2. I think when we were recommending, this is why for listeners.
Yeah, you told me to skip 2.
We were wondering, it was just like, what was Jen's order? But Jen was like, I kind of remember seeing Mission Impossible, the original, the first one once. And both Greg and I were like, okay, well then just start with 3 and do 3 through 6. And then if you want to, then go back. You can rewatch 1 and then maybe check out 2. I didn't realize that she would be checking out 2, like in the run up to like recording this episode, like turning it off and like spinning in her chair to a microphone to start talking to you, the good listeners out there. But yeah, that's it's the least essential, and it's the one that's been the least mind, and I think there's a reason for that, because it doesn't work. Interesting parallels, by the way, it's just in this conversation, I never thought of it before, to the last franchise we talked about, where the second movie has got some sexism problems, and also like says like, what if this character was just more of a jerk? Like, what if he was just kind of more self-centered and less helpful to other people? But at least with Indiana Jones, they were like, well, it's said earlier, like the events of this movie are why he then was like a slightly better person in the first one. Whereas this one is just like, I don't know, he's got long hair. That's all we have for you. That's the only difference.
All right. My number 5, I would say, is Mission Impossible 1.
Okay.
It's it's the first one. It's the one that started it all. It's a classic. And again, as I said earlier, like when I first saw it for the first time, the twist of like, oh no, he's alive and he's the bad guy was like mind blowing at the time. And I looked it up. This actually Mission Impossible 1 precedes The Sixth Sense. And I feel like in my movie history brain, that's the movie that started shocking twists and reveals in movies, at least that type. But this one was before, so it did it first. But to me, it feels very dated when I watch it now. And it's just funny because it's like, oh, they really like, a lot of the component parts are there, right? But it doesn't have, the supporting characters are not as strong, and Ethan Hunt as a character I just don't find as charismatic in this movie as I do in the later ones. And it feels like I cracked up because the opening scene is like them doing a similar thing to what they do in future movies, where they have like, they set up like a sound stage to trick somebody with a mask, and they're recording it. But in this movie, because it's the 90s, it's like a tiny CRT TV.
Yes.
And
it's just the like 90s and they're in Ukraine. So, I mean, you know.
Right, yeah. And then like the missions are like on an airplane, like a cassette tape you push into the seat, basically. So just like, I just thought that I just got a kick out of that, because if you watch the newer ones, right? Like I had just watched Fallout right before. And I was like, oh, how far we have come. So I couldn't really shake that. And I do feel like the train, the big fight scene on like, it's like a bullet train, I think I want to say, at the end. It's some sort of train in an indoor tunnel. It's a high-speed
rail through the tunnel.
Okay. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Like John Voight, I don't know how old he is in this movie. I mean, but him like roughing it on a high-speed train with Tom Cruise, like, is just, I just laughed. I was like, this looks ridiculous. I respected it conceptually, because he's in basically like a wetsuit and then holding on to like a cable on the train. And then there's something that makes Ethan go like tunneling towards the camera, or like
Well,
not tunneling.
it's the
What's the word?
helicopter exploding. He puts
Yeah,
the
yeah, there you
gum
go.
explosion on it. I also
Yes, the
I
gum.
just watched this before we recorded it earlier
Okay,
tonight,
okay, there you
so
go.
this
So
is
it's fresh
very
for you
vivid
too.
in my memory. Yeah,
Yeah. So yeah, this was like, I respect its place, but it's not one of my favorites.
fair. So my uh, I will say like I sort of have like a tier thing, and it gets really tough within the tiers of like what I want to do within them. But the tiers are very clear. I'm a very tier minded person when I'm ranking movies, I guess. And Mission Impossible 2, very simply, very
Well, there's
easily,
enough of them you can
last
tier
place.
them. That's not true for a
That's
lot of
true.
franchises.
That's true. Although I also tiered Indiana Jones without any qualms, even though at the time there were only four. But yeah, so I have two movies in a tier together. So I'm going to put both of them out there. So I have at 5, I have Mission Impossible 3, and 4, the first Mission Impossible. And basically, I want to. I said that so I can chime in on the first one. I'm not really going to argue like it's substantively so much better than Mission Impossible 3, because I don't think that it is, and I sort of have wavered back and forth on it. There is just something about like I was in high school and I went to go see Mission Impossible and I really liked it and I had a good time with it, and that mid 90s like aesthetic of it all is like appealing now, like, and the fact that like it's so quaint in the way that like, even though I have not gone back, I feel like if we went back and looked at the 60s show, it would be like, woof, like that's quaint as hell. And then the 90s one is also sort of very much an earmark in its own way. Plus, like just how young Tom Cruise and Ving Rhames are in it, like really kind of marks like where we are, how the franchise has evolved. And I feel like the sort of the core double crossing of it, and the sort of quote unquote bad guys that are chasing Ethan are like 100% in the right. Like it's just like, yeah, there's a problem, there's a mole, all evidence is pointing towards you. Like I have to take you down. Like this is like, they're not wrong, and at no point is Ethan Hunt like, I hate this guy for trying to take me down. He's just like, I just got to clear my name and I got to figure out like what's going on. It is fundamentally very funny where it's like, we think that you're the one who's trying to sell secrets to shady buyers to make money, and he's like, well, then
To Vanessa Redgrave.
and I just got to steal secrets, and I got to be the one who's doing that in order to prove I'm not doing that. Very very good, like proto Ethan Hunt insane thinking. And yes, Vanessa Redgrave, who it is different because it was a different time, and Tom Cruise is like almost fundamentally a different person in this movie compared to the sort of like McQuarrie trilogy of 4, 5, and 6. But her character Max, who is the mom of Vanessa Kirby's character in Fallout, that mom and daughter are the only
Wait.
two characters. Yes, that's she says it in the background in Fallout, which you don't remember because you watched the first one after. But she's like, my mother Max, when he first goes into their like her
That's
like
right.
presentation, she's talking about her mother Max.
This
and
is
what
blowing my
she's
mind right now.
Yeah,
That's so
and
cool.
they're also the only two characters who credibly look at Ethan Hunt during these movies and are like, I want to have sex with him. And I believe they want to have sex with him because they both do. So that there's something in that family that is just like, I see through everything. She saw through his mid 90s chipmunk face and was just like, yes, there's something in here. There's still the
fluffy crew
Maverick
cut.
of Top Gun. It's got a floppy crew cut. And there's a lot of Dutch angles because it's a Brian De Palma movie. There is
That's
something.
the other thing that weirded me out. So the Kittredge is the CIA guy.
Yes.
The first meeting they have in that like aquarium restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
I was like getting motion sickness. Like it's just so many angle up shots on his face. I'm just like, what are you doing?
And it's getting like closer, and it's getting more tilted. I like all that. Like it's I don't always dig Brian De Palma, but like in this mold, I feel like his flourishes work really well and do kind of make it feel like in a Hitchcockian way that doesn't necessarily work out.
Sure.
I also really remember this. I don't think this is putting her on blast. Jasmine doesn't remember movies, like apart from she has maybe like a handful of movies that she's watched so many times that she knows them by heart. But in general, like we could rewatch a movie and she'll be like, I don't know what happens. Like, I don't remember. So like she once again today was shocked that Emilio Estevez was killed in the first like 15
Oh, that's
minutes
brutal. That
of,
scene. I was not
of
prepared for
that.
that.
Well, that's the thing is like, I remember really thinking of like, they set it up. It's Emilio Estevez, Kristen Scott Thomas, and Tom Cruise, and then a couple of ladies, and John
And they're
Boyd.
all dead.
And then they all die.
The whole
And within
team
the
is
first 20
dead.
minutes, they're dead. They're all dead. Everyone's dead. You get some real good emphatic Tom Cruise pointing.
No,
And
that's the other thing too, is that these first two movies, it's a lot of Tom Cruise just yelling at the same pitch.
yeah,
And I
is
feel
like
he evolves after this.
yeah, he's very like he's in that like the firm
Yeah.
pocket.
Yeah.
There's a lot of you can't handle the truth. Oh no, like I want the truth. Like that sort of like he's like that's good for me in the way Al Pacino kind of fell into the hoo-ha for a while. Like Tom Cruise fell into the I want the truth.
So
But the thing is, it's so like for me, all that works. And I just have to say, the sort of centerpiece sequence of the movie with the suspension into the data room in Langley is absolute gangbusters. And even though he's using a zip disk to go into a computer, I will note that Luther is pining for a 686, like futuristic. Like I don't think Pentiums existed yet, so he was just like, well, they've got 686s now, and so that's really great. That's again mid 90s, but yeah, it's like a zip drive being put into the thing. But the whole like sequence of setting it up and how they get in there, and there's like the rat that messes with Jean Reno, and the knife falls. Great, like just so great, and works really well. And I don't know, while there's many things we're going to say that are really good about Mission Impossible 3, like the peaks of the first one and my sort of personal memories of it put it slightly above.
sure. No, that's fair. That's fair. And unsurprisingly, my number 4 is Mission Impossible 3. Because I feel like and for me, why I ended up putting this one above the original is 2 reasons. One, Philip Seymour Hoffman is incredible in this movie, as he is in all movies, pretty much. And secondly, because this is the movie that I think starts to tap into who Ethan Hunt really is as a character.
Mm-hmm.
Going forward, I think, right? Like it's how much they thought this would play out in later movies, I'm not sure, but this is the movie where his kind of like central emotional baggage happens, right? And they really use it. Like that's the thing, is like they're using every part of the animal with this movie, right? Like like they're not wasting anything in terms of constantly making that his hang up, his motivation, right? His mystery with other characters of like, oh, who's Ethan Hunt? Like, oh, he had a wife, like, right. And just giving that character depth, like it all happens in this movie, right? And it also is like a really good, like, spies can't have personal lives, which, by now we've seen in countless movies, probably, including James Bond movies. But like this movie really put it in focus, and I feel like just did a really good job telling that story, to be, because I was convinced that Julia and Ethan were meant to, like, that they should be, like, I wanted them to be together, right? Which in most spy thrillers, if there is a loved one who gets like hostaged later or something like that, it's not like we really know them that well. You know what I mean? Like they're more like a means to an end as opposed to their own character. And I really feel like they did a lot of work in this movie to get us invested in their relationship. Knowing that something bad was going to happen, obviously. Right. Like I don't think it's really doing a good job of hiding that. It's very thinly veiled that like all of this is going to, like, it's too good to be true. Like all this is going to be a disaster later. But I don't know. I just feel like it's so central. This movie is so central to its character. I had to put it a little bit higher up. Yeah.
I mean, I have no problem with that because I agree with everything that you're saying. And it's so, again, there was a reason why I was like, well, you should start with 3. Because like, does sort of feel like where the franchise as it exists now really began. It stopped feeling like there's just, a series of interconnected movies about spying with Tom Cruise in the center of it, and instead was like, it's about like Ethan Hunt's a character who has like done things that carries forward across different movies, and that's great, and I think that's really good. The only thing I will say as potential drawback is like I never really remember any of the action scenes from this movie. Like, you know, there's the thing on the bridge, and that's literally like, and I get there's like the shootout at the end where, you know, we kind of get confirmation of who's the turncoat within the good guys, which isn't a super surprise. Like, I think, you know, it's not like, oh my god. Oh, sorry. A side note, I will say I want to point to The Usual Suspects, which is before Mission Impossible and The
Oh,
Sixth
right.
Sense as a twist thing. But you know, again, just to give some Chris McQuarrie props. But yeah, I don't feel like, you know, there's like a huge, like, you know, big kind of action thing that's in this movie.
Yeah, I
But
mostly remember because this is the one I've seen the
longest ago.
longest ago. Yeah, it was a few months ago that I watched this one. But main thing I remember is I remember being so surprised, pleasantly surprised by this, that Julia gets in on the action,
Yes.
right? That like in a
Which is
very
great.
believable way because she's like terrified and confused, but also like I can do this. Like okay, I have to do this. And then you know Ethan's giving her instructions, right, and being like, "Here's what you have to do," right? And she's like, "Ah, like am I gonna be able? You don't know if she's gonna be able to do it." And then she could do it,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I that's the action sequence that I remember the most from that movie. I think.
That's fair. These in general statement is these movies are so good at getting right up to the edge of being like, well, now Ethan Hunt's going to die. And you know he's not going to die because Tom Cruise never, like, unless you read in the news that Tom Cruise died doing a stunt, making a Mission
Yes.
Impossible movie, his
Which probably
character
will
will not
happen
die.
someday. We need to
Look,
mentally prepare ourselves for
yes,
that day.
let's get ready. He's not going to die, but like, I still am believing of like, they still have me suspending my disbelief of knowing the realities of this franchise of like, yeah, it's like, she may not get that thing out of his head or out of his nose or wherever it is in that sequence. And same is true for future movies on the list. But I just want to cycle back. The reason that I'm always contemplating, you know, Michelle Monaghan, who's amazing as Julia, and the other characters in the movie who are pretty all uniformly great in it. But the reason I keep thinking about putting it over the first one is Philip Seymour Hoffman, who's so incredible. The scene where he's in the bathroom because the wine's been spilled on him, and then Tom Cruise is there in a Philip Seymour Hoffman mask, and then Philip Seymour Hoffman has to act like Ethan Hunt, being him, like trying to get the person to like explain why he's not talking because the voice is processing so we can have the voice modulator work, and he's just really perfectly doing that, like Ethan Hunt, Tom Cruise, like finger point of and because he was amazing, he was so good. And we were discussing this earlier before recording, which was always a mistake to talk about these movies, but there's something so good that like Philip Seymour Hoffman could do in a way that very few, if anyone else, could, where like when he realizes like he's been captured by Tom Cruise, he's just like, what's your name, who do you care about, like what, because I'm you know I'm gonna have to I'm gonna hurt her, I'm gonna, and then and then I'm gonna hurt you, and she's gonna have to watch. And it's like the way he describes it is like it's so chilling because he means it, but it also like is like just so exasperated of like, and the way I described it earlier was it just feels like he's just like, you're gonna make me do work over the weekend, like I have to stay here, and or I have to have like 3 more
Right.
meetings because you
Right.
did this
You're
thing.
making me do this, not I am
Yeah,
the bad guy choosing to
and
do
it's just
this.
like, like I'm so like, but it also that it's like this like mild inconvenience to him of like, I'm gonna have to find this person, I'm gonna have to hurt them, then I'm gonna have to hurt you. And he was so good at that. R.I.P. Philip Seymour Hoffman. I think the best
He's
villain.
he's the opposite of mustache twirling, right? That's a criticism a lot of villains get when they're not nuanced enough or not complicated enough. Like, oh, they're just a mustache twirling villain. He is a prime example of how you don't do that, right? You could do something
Mhm.
else. And yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we've done the first trilogy, quote unquote, the first 3, which I think many people agree. There's some people put 1 a little higher. Maybe they creep it up. But this is the real meat and bones. This is where things get tough, I think. Like, because this is the rest of them are just all one tier for me, and it's constant jostling. So I'm curious where you've landed.
All right, so my number 3 is Ghost Protocol, which I loved when I watched it. I was like, this is so fun. Like, and they're all riffing off each other, and this is the one where Benji basically becomes a field agent, right? I love that this is like his kind of origin story, right? He's finally transitioning from just the computer guy to being in the field, and he keeps obsessing over, shouldn't I wear a mask? Wouldn't this be a great occasion for me to wear a mask, right? And I love that running bit. There's so much, and also like, and I don't remember the actress who plays Agent Carter. You're looking it up.
Paula Patton.
She's amazing. She's like, I love her. And like, I feel like not enough people talk about her when they talk about these movies. But I feel like her versus Léa Seydoux, the French assassin, and like that moment where she kicks her out the window, you're just like, whoa. You're like, you weren't supposed to do that. And like Jeremy Renner, right? I was like, oh wow, like people should stop making fun of Jeremy Renner. He is quite good in this movie. I like the idea that he's like a really good agent who became an analyst, and we meet him as an analyst, but then clearly when he's fighting, he's almost if not as good as Tom Cruise, right? Because he's Jeremy Renner, Hawkeye, right? Like, so he's got the fight choreography chops. But then he is also like very anxious and very nerdy. Like he's the wet blanket of the group. So it's like a really fun group dynamic that I loved. And like this one I think has really good. So where Mission Impossible 2, I feel like was gross in its like female like seduction tactics. This I feel like was a good example of a strong female character who's doing that as a part of her job, but not in a way that made me feel gross. So like, so props to this movie for that. But okay, so why, the question then is, if I like this movie so much and I had so much fun watching it, why is it number 3? And I would say that's at the end of the day because of the villain. We were just talking about Philip Seymour Hoffman, and like between Philip Seymour Hoffman and the actor who I don't know who plays Solomon Lane, like
that's Sean Harris, I think.
Okay,
yeah, Sean Harris plays Solomon Lane.
I guess I don't know who that is. Or should I know who that is?
He plays Solomon Lane.
That's it? Okay.
No, he was also in The Borgias, and he was in Prometheus.
Okay. Oh, I've seen Prometheus. Huh.
He's
okay. With the way you said his name made it like, yeah, he's a guy you should know. That's what I thought. And I was like, oh,
that was more my confidence in that. I think I know this guy's name, and so I said it before I actually read it on my screen. So that wasn't supposed to be your confidence in knowing who he is, but it was my confidence in remembering his name.
So in Ghost Protocol, Hendrix, I believe, is the villain, right?
Yes.
He's trying to bomb the world. It's very similar to the motivations of Solomon Lane and other, like the apostles and all those people, right? Where they're like, the more the suffering, the more the peace, right? He's like, his thing is more like a Darwinian version of that, where he's like, we gotta nuke the world so that we can grow stronger and evolve, basically, I think, if I'm getting that correct. But he's barely in the movie. And his final battle with Ethan is like, he just falls down, essentially. From what I remember, and then spends the rest of the movie like looking like half dead, looking at him, being like, as the clock is ticking, like, are we gonna make it before the bomb detonates? So he's a much more forgettable villain. I didn't find him to be particularly interesting as a villain. So when I take that aspect of it, and I do think that these movies generally are better when they have more, at least scarier villains or more compelling villains, and so because of that, it just knocks it down a peg.
So yeah, I think that's all fair. Given, I will say, like all of these 3 remaining movies, each of them have been the number 1 movie for me on my list since all 6 movies have been out, and they've just shifted. I also, after my most recent rewatches, have Ghost Protocol at 3 for basically the same reasons that you said. Like, I would expand it to sort of like the last, not act, I guess, but the last sort of sequence which I think is in
Because the
Bangalore.
second act is the best.
The first and
Right?
second act, because you've got
Yeah.
you got the Budapest prison escape
Oh,
pre-credits,
yeah.
which is incredible. You have you have Tom Wilkinson, a great cameo who immediately gets shot in the head. Gets to say disavowed, of course. The president has issued Ghost Protocol as he's wont to do, and then he gets shot in the head. Then you have the Kremlin sequence, which is awesome, and then Burj Khalifa, which pound for pound, maybe the best sequence in the whole series, which is crazy because this is the third movie on both of our lists, and it might have the best scene or sequence in the movie, in the movies. But it's incredible. But then after that, and they run through the sandstorm. It deflates a little bit, and not to the point where it's like this is a bad movie. I watch it. I will throw this movie on randomly and be like, I'm just kind of on in the background, and then within 10 minutes, I'm just like, yes, I'm watching the whole thing.
Also, Simon Pegg pretending to be a waiter with like a phantom limb is like
it's
so amazing.
He puts the diamonds in the sugar bowl.
I guess I shouldn't say phantom limb. I should say like decoy limb.
Yeah, like
he's got like a fake
aesthetic limb. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that actually does get me every time.
And he has to dab the diamonds.
Yeah. When he comes in, and I forget what it is that he's doing when he comes in after Tom Cruise has like swung his way back in from climbing the tallest building in the world, as he actually did, like an insane man, and flying in and almost falling out. And Simon Pegg was just like, well, that was very complicated. Like what he just did was like, that was tough. What have you guys been up to? Like, it's a very easy joke, but it lands. I don't think enough because he's in the third movie, but he's not like that prominent. Simon Pegg really is just such a weapon for these movies because he's very funny. He's the like I'm in the field now, but I don't quite know what I'm doing. But he is competent. Like when the time comes, he's right there. But he is understandably like always scared and flustered. And he's great. And like he's such a good counterpoint to Luther as just in their modes, I guess, or in their demeanors in interacting with Ethan. But yeah, that's like the third act is a little bit saggy, compared to the rest of the movie. But that's also because the first two acts are incredible.
I also feel like the sort of heel turn's the wrong word, but the transition that the Alec Baldwin character makes from antagonist to ally, to me, is a little clunky. Where
that's in Rogue Nation though. That's not in this one.
Yeah, but like
he's not in this one.
But I guess isn't he the one who's like, oh wait, he's not in this one at all?
I was wondering when we would have the first
this problem because I watched them all together.
Like
I cut the wrong wire.
Movie. That's in Rogue Nation. That's in the fifth movie.
All right, I'll say
the only we see Tom Wilkinson. It's the only sort of head. It's Renner as the kind of like I'm the person who has to control things, and then
oh, so I am just erasing Tom Wilkinson in my brain and replacing him with Alec Baldwin because I'm like, isn't Alec Baldwin with Jeremy Renner? But that's in Rogue Nation. You're right.
Yes,
I mean, I didn't think you were wrong.
Jeremy Renner's been pulled in to explain what happened in Ghost Protocol.
Got it.
To a Senate committee, and then to has to deal with Alec Baldwin while everyone else is out in the field. But
so I guess maybe I would pivot to my small critique is that Tom Wilkinson's character is very forgettable.
I mean, I think he is on screen for like 32 seconds. Like it's very small, but that's fair. It is forgettable. It's like, oh, Tom Wilkinson's in this. How come I don't remember? Oh, he's dead. He's already dead. That's why I don't remember that he's in this movie. So that's fair.
So the revelation that Julia is still alive.
They do kind of throw that. I don't mind that because I'm glad she's alive, but it is interesting that they are like, in a way that makes sense in this movie where it's just like, we've got a few characters continuing what happened with his wife. And then, it's this whole big reveal for Jeremy Renner that like, he's so guilty about it. And he's like, I gotta tell.
He's like, it's fine, we're cool.
And then it's like, oh no, she's right over there. She's like, hi, just waving from like a dock. That's it's a little cheesy, but I
did appreciate that they pulled off a things were not as they seemed across two movies, right? Because it's
That's
like you
true.
have to really appreciate the reveal of that with Renner's character. You have to kind of remember the events of number
That's true.
3
Yeah. It's
to
also
really appreciate it.
it's a rare defridging of a wife
Oh yeah,
character,
that's right.
which, we've got to give some props to that. Take her out of the fridge. She doesn't have to be a motivator.
We can let her thaw.
Only in death. So two things real quick. Credit to Jeremy Renner for joining a franchise very clearly to be like, I will take over this franchise now that the aging main star is going to leave. And then the aging main star was like, I'm actually not leaving. And so then it's like, okay, I guess
immortal.
in the next movie, I'll be kind of like in an office and I'll be talking to you and I'll only show up for a few scenes. And then the next movie, he's like, I'm in a bigger franchise. I cannot appear in this movie. I don't have time. So he just sort of faded away, which is also somewhat similar, although not over so many movies, to what happened when he was supposed to replace Matt Damon as Jason Bourne, and he was going to be the next Bourne. And then people were like,
oh, that's right.
We don't like that. We're just bringing Matt Damon back. And they brought Matt Damon
Justice for
back.
Jeremy Renner.
I mean, let the snow melt.
And then he got in a massive like snowplow accident. He's had a rough time.
Just let it melt. Let it melt next time. I don't know if you've seen it. This is too much of a tangent, but I'll say it anyway. I saw a thing of Jeremy Renner on a talk show, and he's like, Paul Rudd sent me a fake cameo, like I was a nobody who someone had hired. And so it's like a video of Paul Rudd with the cameo logo. He goes, hey, Jerry, heard you had a bit of an accident. And he goes, this whole thing. And the end of it is he just goes, how about next time, just let the snow melt, huh? All right, Jerry, I'll see you later. I hope you're feeling good. And it was very funny because Paul Rudd's very funny.
Very on brand for Paul Rudd. That's amazing.
So the other thing I'll say real quick is I agree with you that Kurt Hendricks, who is the nuclear strategist, codenamed Cobalt, who is the evil guy here, but played by Michael Nyqvist, who is also the main bad guy in the first John Wick movie. And he is very good in that.
Oh.
So, because he's the one who's just like, has to react on the phone when he finds out that like, all the John Wick's coming for him. And he's not he's a very good actor and he's not bad in the movie. He's just really not given a lot to do. And he's not a super strong presence in comparison to the ones who came before and after.
All right. So my number 2, this was the hardest one for me.
Okay.
Number 1 and 2. I toggled back and forth.
I think you just give them both. A
lot of times. But here's the thing. For the sake of, possibly for the sake of good podcasting, but also to be truer to my heart and not my head, I'm going to go Fallout for number 2.
Okay.
It may actually be the better movie. I'm willing to concede that on the whole. And it's, and like, again, this is like 1A. Like, this is not really number 2, I feel like.
Sure.
But I thought that this movie had a lot, like, brings a lot of stuff together. It's kind of like a high wire act in what it's juggling, because not only does it have to introduce a new character in Henry Cavill, right? So we're switching up the team, and a member of the team is now an antagonist, rival, turns out villain, right? So there's a lot going on there. But also, we bring back Julia, and Julia's in the final act, right? And so there's this whole thing where it's like we're bringing back the baggage from Mission Impossible 3, right? Where he's like, oh no, once again, like I failed to protect my wife and now we're all going to die. And why, like even my attempt to break up with her to protect her didn't work. Right. So this is all of that stuff. Right. And then it's like, really, like you mentioned, this is like the end of another trilogy. Right. So it really is landing the plane in a way that I thought was very satisfying, for this arc. Right. And and just like, yeah, Solomon Lane is a very good villain. And I feel like all of the characters kind of go through a lot in this movie. And so, yeah. So there's no really good reason. Well, should I just explain what my number 1 is and explain the reason?
Well, I mean, it's only people who don't know the Mission Impossible movies don't know what your number 1 is now. But sure. Well, I think say both, because I'm with you in that, like, these are very sort of interchangeable. I have them in the reverse order of what you do,
Right,
but
which is sort of what I figured.
I've had it the other way, like, at times
Yeah.
recently.
And I feel
So
like as early as this morning, I probably had it the other way.
yeah.
But at the end of the day, there's one person who's putting Rogue Nation at the top of my list, and it is Rebecca Ferguson as Ilsa. She is so good in this movie, and that's the thing. Is like, I guess that my one critique of Fallout, my one complaint, if I were to file one, is that her character, while she's very prominent in the movie, is somewhat underused, right? Like, because she's so amazing in Rogue Nation,
Yeah.
and like
Every time.
the fight scenes she's in are incredible. Like whatever jujitsu, like what's the no? That's it's not jujitsu. It's I guess it is. It's jujitsu. The thing where you take someone down with your legs, like it's and like the tackling and the I have a friend who does jujitsu, and he's probably tearing his hair out right now. Sorry, Walter. I am don't understand the sport that you do.
Walter, comment below on what mixed martial art Ilsa.
But yeah, it feels like she feels like a UFC fighter, right? Because she's like she's got good ground game, but she can fight and like she can punch and shoot and all that kind of, like she's very well rounded. So because she blew me away, it really took me by surprise in Rogue Nation. That alone is putting it at the top for me, regardless of whether or not the film as a whole stacks up to Fallout. I do think as a complete story, as like a script, Fallout is probably better than Rogue Nation. Because I just complained that Rogue Nation has this clunky.
I mean, I was going to say, does it change your rankings that your one of your worst parts of Ghost Protocol is actually in Rogue Nation? Does that affect the ranking at all? But it doesn't have to, because but it doesn't have to, because that's the. I think I said this to you. I don't think I said it on the episode yet because we were getting to the rankings. I think these three movies, which I'll sort of loosely call them a Query trilogy. I don't think he even has co-writing credit. He was like a uncredited rewriter on Ghost Protocol, but like I think he really pulled that story together, and then he was directing and writing the other two. I think this is the best trilogy of the 2010s in all of movies, and I don't really know what the competition would be. I think the only one I would have considered what of all movie trilogies in the 2010s in that decade. The only other one that I would consider is John Wick, but that one just clearly ends setting up the fourth one. That it doesn't feel like a trilogy. It just feels like the first three of a four-part of a quadrilogy, to use a made-up word for the Alien DVD set. But
2010s. Okay, so Lord of the Rings is safe. I was like, what are you doing?
That's the 2000s. Yeah, I mean, you could talk the Hobbit movies, but these are better than the Hobbit.
Yeah, these are better than the Hobbit movies.
I mean, the Dark Knight trilogy only has one installment here. I mean, the Iron Man trilogy. Right. I mean, Iron Man trilogy starts in 2008, so that also doesn't. There's no Marvel trilogy that I would say is better than
from this time period. No, I think you might be right.
I mean, maybe from any time period. Like, is there a Marvel trilogy better than this? I don't know. That's a whole other discussion. The problem is, like, the trilogies that you think might be have one movie that I think is not particularly good. Like, except for maybe Guardians. I guess that's the one I would listen to. But anyway, and as much as I wish I could say that it was the sequel trilogy for Star Wars was my favorite trilogy of the decade. Again, there's one movie in the trilogy I don't particularly care for. So Mission Impossible it is. So yeah, I think the difference between Rogue Nation and Fallout, and I think even, I do think looking at it analytically, Ghost Protocol has those weak elements that you discussed, and I agreed with. But I think these two are, it's really just, it's almost like what's the last one you watched is like, which one are you going to connect with? I'm fully with you on, Ilsa Faust. Anytime Ilsa Faust isn't on screen, the other characters should be asking, where's Ilsa? Because she's incredible. I have to make sure I don't get put into horny jail on this podcast. But I will just say it's possible no human being has ever looked better than she does in the Opera House sequence.
That whole sequence in general is amazing. There's something very Hitchcock about it in a way that I loved. Like when she's the one with the like bassoon gun, right? Or is that the other guy? I can't remember.
No, the it's the male assassin has like
Oh, that's right.
like it's like an alto saxophone gun or like a flute gun
Oh,
of
that
some
makes sense.
sort.
Yeah, it has flute
Um,
keys, but I was like, what is that? Like, it's because it's
yeah,
curved on the bottom, so it's not a flute.
which is great
Um,
because Tom Cruise can't quite figure out how to fire it right away. Like he's trying
yes.
to figure out like what to do, which is a
But
good, again.
once they show the musicians going through security with their instruments, I was like, oh yeah, like this is happening.
There we go.
So yeah, like that whole sequence for me is probably my favorite of all time for the again. So like the film as a
Yeah.
whole maybe is not as good as Fallout, but I think like that sequence, Rebecca Ferguson as Ilsa in that sequence,
Mm-hmm.
it's just such an amazing introduction to her character, and like I don't know, it's amazing.
I will say I regularly forget, maybe now because I'm saying it to you on a recording, I'll remember. I regularly forget she's already been in the movie. Like in my mind, I'm like, well, that's like one of the greatest character introductions of all time. But she's been in the movie when he's captured and is being held prisoner, and she ends up
I
rescuing
guess it's
him.
the introduction of her as
That level of
a
assassin.
full blown assassin. Yeah, we don't quite know what her deal is when we meet her in the opening scene, but you're totally right. I had just forgotten that.
Well, I forgot it too. I always forget that. Like in my mind,
And
I think of that as
that's
a
a
great
great
introduction.
introduction as well, because it instantly, first of all, she instantly has chemistry with Tom Cruise. It's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Where and it's like we don't know who she is. She looks like she's about to torture him, and then she helps him and let him get away. And you're just like, who is this person? And why is she doing these things? It's like instantly lends a mystique about her, and she's like incredibly competent with fighting. So you're like, oh, she must be another agent, but like, why is she with these other agents? Why is she with the bad guy? But then she
Right.
has a soft spot for Ethan, clearly, even though they just met, right?
Yeah.
And then in that scene when, sorry, this is a tangent, but in that scene when Ethan is chained up, and then he like basically does a crunch
Yeah, he shimmy crunches his
and then
locked hands.
flips.
Yeah,
It's
insane.
amazing. I was like, how is he doing that? Like, what is...
Another thing where it's like anyone else, and I would be like, I guess they did a weird like CGI thing. But it's like I bet Tom Cruise could do that.
No, he
Like
just
I bet
worked out
Tom
a lot.
Cruise
He did a lot of
spent like
sit-ups.
he spent 8 months working out to be able to do that one thing. And proud we all are of him for doing that. Yeah, the scene where they get to Tom Hollander as the prime minister in order to get his information to unlock the secret box, which I would say to defend the movie that you put at number one from your slander of how bad Alec Baldwin is. Just kidding. That's not really what you said. But that I do like. I understand where he's just like, these people are crazy, and I love that as we go on, there's always someone who's just like, this is insane. Like this is wild that this is happening, and this should not be allowed. And so I appreciate that Alec Baldwin's doing that, and I like that he then shows up because he's like, this guy is crazy, he's going to do something crazy, and gets put in a situation where he ends up hearing that like, oh, actually what he's been talking about is real and isn't what it is. And then there's a great mask reveal after the whole big warning of Ethan Hunt is the manifestation of destiny, as referenced earlier in this recording. But it's excellent. And then the mask stuff always works for me. I don't know why. It's so basic and just so there's something primal about just like, oh, I'm not actually that person. Like rip, like off comes the mask. I love it. And yeah, that sequence is great. And then it ending with, I mean, there is a fight sequence, but like so much of the ending is just like three people sitting around a table with like Benji with the bomb strapped to him.
Mm.
And then there's the running and fighting, and they trap him in the glass box of emotion, and push him over and send him away. Great. Like is just
It is just
really
it's
good.
just great spy versus spy stuff, because it's like there are times when Ethan and Ilsa are working together, there are times when they're working against each other, and it's like so layered and complicated, right? Because they both, the two actors have to play, we are enemies, but we also like each other, but not in like a kitschy kind of like cat and mouse way, you know what I mean? Like they have to do it in a way where it's like, oh, I really wish we weren't serving different people. Like
Right.
and yeah, and then when she Great Ving Rhames moment when she's like, she's delivering the message, I think in an airport or something like that, and she's like, you have three options, and the third option is, or you could come away with me, and then Ving Rhames just goes, oh boy. So
Yeah.
good.
Which, and it's also a great setup for like when like Ving Rhames gets like a real little like emotional scene in Fallout, where he's just like he's only shown a lot of concern and care for like two women, and you know, like gets like is really into that, and that feels like a clear line can be drawn from that to there, even though, again, as mentioned earlier, I don't know if I buy that Rebecca Ferguson is like, I am in love with you, Ethan Hunt. It just feels more just like we mutually respect each other, and we could be like, maybe we would be happy because we have this shared experience. Whereas Vanessa Redgrave and Vanessa Kirby
Right. I mean,
are both like, I
they
actually
have a
think
deeper bond.
we would
It's
have
less
like
primal.
a good time with each other. Which is, it's just interesting because I feel like, you know, weird part of his weird transition into like superhero action star, and this is also just maybe a shift in blockbuster filmmaking, is how like immensely sexless Ethan Hunt is. Like I never feel like he never seems like a horny man or like he's looking to score. He's just like, he's about the job and he does stuff, and he will like occasionally fall in like deep respect with a woman and want to spend time with them, and that's it. Like I don't, even with Julia, I don't feel like he's just like,
But that
God.
kind of tracks, right? Because if from the events of the third movie and what happens and how he kind of has to cut that tie, right? Especially when we learn the backstory of what happened, because I feel like we learn more in Fallout when Luther's explaining what happened, right? That they because the piece of like, well, they did get away for a while, right? Like that I feel like was not explicitly said in any of the past movies, right? So that piece of it, of like that he had to kind of turn that part of his brain off to be able to
Yeah,
continue saving the world, kind of makes sense.
it does. And it's nice that like it means that the end of Mission Impossible 3 isn't like they leave on their honeymoon and immediately break up. It's just like, no, they really did try. They got married and they gave it a shot for a little while, and then, you know, the fact that we see him in a prison in the beginning of the next movie is not like an immediate line from here to there. That they had some time together, which is nice. So, you know, just to add on to what you were saying, it's all very close. I do have Fallout slightly above. It's just like, it's just hit after hit after hit, and like it's, in a way it's crazy that like they just add more plates to spin in the story, because they're bringing back Julia from, you know, from his ex-wife. They're bringing back Ilsa, who, you know, wouldn't necessarily, you know, at the end of the Rogue Nation, it's like, you're free, you can go, and she leaves. And you know, there was no guarantee they would bring her back. They're bringing back Solomon Lane, and like he's suddenly is the main bad guy again. It's you know, they do all that, plus they have Henry Cavill, plus they have Angela Bassett, and like and they have Vanessa Kirby as the weapons dealer, who's great, and her brother, who's also great, even though he doesn't like say a lot. He just looks like menacing, but also kind of dumb, which is perfect for what like the role.
Right, and Ethan 100% identifies that and uses that against
Yes, and they're just like,
the White Widow character, right? To be like, yeah, your brother, huh? And she's like, yeah, I know.
family. What can you do?
Yeah.
And you know, Baldwin getting in the mix. That whole sequence is incredible. The way they trap Henry Cavill, and then just, I mean, there's the jumping out of the high altitude plane, which is an unbelievable sequence of stunts. The Paris chase, the Paris like prison rescue as well, but then the subsequent chase, and then every like the movie's just kind of like trucking along, and you're just like, wow, this is really good. And then it's like, oh, we're also going to have this insane helicopter combat sequence. I believe you texted me like it became Top Gun, like it turned into an aerial battle. While there's also like a great kind of classic bomb diffusion with like the rest of the characters, like trying to hunt down and defuse this bomb, but also hand to hand fighting. You know, it builds this crescendo. I feel like it works. It works so well. We're splitting hairs, but I do have to put this one slightly above. And is this because inevitably I watch it after Rogue Nation, and so then it's the most recent of these that I've watched, so it pushes it up a little bit higher, maybe. But they're so good. It's just what good movies, what joys to take in in a cinema or in a home viewing. Highly recommend seeing it in a giant IMAX theater, in a furniture store, if you have the opportunity to do so.
Yeah, I watched all of these on small screens this week, and I felt it. I was like, oh, like it would be really nice to have seen this in a
Well,
big theater.
good news. You'll see the next one on a big screen
Yes,
in
so yeah.
within 24 hours. One last thing I want to say about which one am I looking at here? This is actually Rogue Nation, which I didn't realize until while we were talking. So early in Rogue Nation, he goes to the record store in London, where to get like a message, but the message is really from the Syndicate. And then the like young woman who again was a little flirty with Tom Cruise, gets killed by Solomon Lane. We find out later it's Solomon Lane. That's Tali Lintra from The Last Jedi. I didn't know that until just now.
Oh,
Another character that is brutally murdered early in a movie.
whoops. I guess
Um,
that's her thing.
I mean,
I loved their passcode conversation
yeah,
where they never have I heard anyone speak about Thelonious Monk and John Coltrane with such conviction, right? And like,
I bought it. I bought it, and to bring back to Fallout, because that's my number one. At the end, the whole extended opening, it feels like it's a very long time. I don't know exactly how long it is until we get to the opening credits, but it's like there's like multiple things happen. They lose these weapons. They kidnap this guy. They make it seem like 3 nuclear bombs have gone off, and they hang on to that just long enough that I'm like, wow, I guess the movie's called Fallout. I guess they really are gonna have it. This is like Sum of All Fears. They're just gonna have it that nuclear bombs went off, and we'll see what happens. And then the walls fall down. Wolf Blitzer comes out and rips his face
so,
off. And just I think Ghost Protocol, because it literally is Tom Cruise saying "light the fuse," is the best transition to the credits, but Fallout is a close second, where it's like it's over when I say it's over, whatever cheesy thing that he says that like gets you really pumped, and then the music starts and you're just ready to go, because these movies rule.
that's the other thing I'll say is that the use of the original theme is always very smartly employed. Like it's always exactly at the right moment to amp things up or to punctuate a scene or something. You know what I mean? Like it's not just kind of like they're not just playing it constantly. I feel like it would, for me, I would think that it would be very easy to overuse the theme because it's so iconic. And they're like, remember, this is a Mission Impossible movie, right? I could definitely, in lesser hands, I feel like that sort of thing could easily happen. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
But also a franchise that throughout has been very good about, in the sort of classic John Williams score mold, like holding back on music. And I'll point especially across the eras of the Langley hanging from the ceiling scene in the first movie, is all about the silence. The decibel can't get over a certain level. Incredibly quiet scene for like 5 or 6 minutes, with very little sound, or if there's sound, it's like cutting to outside the room for like comedic effect and then coming back. And then when he's in Rogue Nation, when he's in the underwater tank to put in the profile so Benji can get to the like whatever safety deposit box thing, that's also a very good job of like there's moments where like a score could be like, oh no, like he's been knocked away, or oh no, he dropped the thing, or he's running out of oxygen, and instead they're just like, nope, like it's underwater, we're just going to hear the sort of gurgle of water and bubbles of his oxygen coming out, and it's super effective. So it's good. It's almost like it's a movie that should have at least gotten a sound nomination at some point,
Yeah, that's fair.
in its Oscar history.
That's a good segue, because I think I did want to do the quick Oscars watch. There's not much to report, unfortunately, because
We're watching,
I
but we're not
scoured
seeing
the
much.
internet. I was like, really? Like this movie's never gotten like a,
None of them.
I don't know. Like I guess it wouldn't get visual effects because it's using practical most of the time. But
This
like,
is we need a stunt category or a choreography category that is for both action and like musical choreography artists. That's where I think this movie would have gotten nominations, if not
Right.
wins, every year.
Right. It's a very similar thing to like the conversation we had when we reviewed John Wick 4 of like, there's a lot of opportunity to award this movie. The structure of the Oscars is not really set up to be friendly to movies like this. But that said, like Tom Cruise, and so then that's interesting because Tom Cruise on his own has gotten 4 nominations, right? You mentioned, and these are all movies that we mentioned, I think. Born on the 4th of July in 1990, Jerry Maguire in 1997, Magnolia in 2000, and then he has a producer credit, like best picture, the best picture nomination for Top Gun Maverick last year counts as a nomination for him, right? Because he would have won the Oscar as a producer.
Mhm.
So, you know, he's done okay, but as you mentioned, most of these nominations are for movies. Like if we take out Top Gun, then all of these movies are for kind of more like traditional Oscar baity kind of roles, right? Which he doesn't do anymore. So it's like this question of will
Right.
Tom Cruise ever win an Oscar? We were just here with Harrison Ford last time.
It does, yeah, and it's interesting because there was a while when he was producing movies for other people. Like now he seems to only produce movies that he is starring in, which again I think speaks to the sort of post Katie Holmes Scientology versus psychiatry tussles of the mid 2000s. He's really sort of closed off his world away from appearing. He was in like Rock of Ages, like that musical. I think that's
Oh,
the
he was
last
great in
thing.
that.
Yeah,
I don't think
that
that's a
was
popular opinion, but that
well,
I enjoyed
I
that movie a
remember
lot.
people liking it. And again, he had like the Tropic Thunder thing, but like he's no longer working with auteurs. He works with his guys, and he produces movies that are just movies he's going to be in. Which it felt like Top Gun Maverick might have been the best shot. People were, there was that 5th slot in Best Actor that ended up being that guy from that movie that I didn't see. um, about the man and his daughter, and I don't remember the name of the movie
Wait, The Whale?
or the actor. No, not the whale. Brendan. It was the 5th. Paul Mescal. Is that his name?
Oh, After Sun. Yeah.
After Sun. There we go.
Yeah.
Apologies to Paul Mescal, who I've only heard incredible things about that movie. But it was like there were the 4 actors that were like, well, these are definitely getting nominated, and then the 5th slot was like open, and it was like, could Tom Cruise get in if there's like a Top Gun momentum to reward this big financial hit and blockbuster? And the answer to that was no.
And Tom Cruise didn't even attend the Oscars last year.
Well, he didn't get nominated. That's why.
So I think it's not looking good.
No.
That's all I'll say.
Which is, again, is fine because again, there are enough, some would argue issues around Tom Cruise that like, I don't know. Like maybe they're just like, we do remember when everyone gave a standing ovation to Roman Polanski, and like maybe we don't want to have like someone who's involved in something that's a little suspect. Which again, maybe that's not fair to equate those, but there's I could see there being enough kind of to hold back
reticence.
when there needs to be I think a lot of momentum to get him over the top, unless he changes his approach and starts showing up in supporting roles in more auteur or quiet dramatic movies, which could be interesting. I don't know, but I could see him getting the sort of Henry Fonda on Golden Pond, like old man performance Oscar someday, where he's like the grandfather in a movie. But like, how old will he have to be to actually be willing to present himself as the old man?
But I feel like in a recent press cycle, he's been quoted as saying that just like Harrison Ford with Indiana Jones, he just wants to keep playing this character.
Sure.
Until he's too old, until into his 80s, right?
Which, I mean, again, I was very skeptical that it would work with Indiana Jones, but I had a good time with that movie. And, until they make a Mission Impossible movie that I don't enjoy or I don't think he's able to sort of hold up his end of the bargain, I'll be there and I'll buy it. And maybe he'll be in his 80s before that happens. I still feel like he'll die doing a stunt though before he gets to that point.
That seems like where we're headed. Like his idea is like, I'm just going to do this until I can't anymore physically. Like either I die during a stunt or I injure myself enough that I can't do this anymore.
Right.
Like he paralyzes himself, right? Or something. It's going to be something dramatic like that.
The Tom Cruise remake of Rear Window is what gets him his Oscar after he's paralyzed himself, and he has to be in a wheelchair.
I would watch that movie. I don't know.
I mean,
that sounds great.
Yeah. I mean, who says no? Probably Tom Cruise because he doesn't want to be paralyzed.
Or either that, or he's in his old age, maybe in a wheelchair, maybe not. We don't want to be ableist. True. He opens this. He's teaching a school for other agents, spy school.
Oh, sure. He's like Professor Xavier of IMF.
But then all the young hotshot spies are like trying to compete with each other and don't respect him, and then he earns their respect.
It's Top Gun Maverick.
Yeah,
is what you're saying.
Yes.
And then he gets in a jet plane, and even though he doesn't have to run and jump, he's just flying a jet plane. And then they do the trench run.
We're joking, but like that's very possible that they make that.
Right. These are all maybe bad pitches, but they're also movies that I would see.
They would get greenlit.
They would.
Most likely. Anyway, so I think this is a good transition to looking ahead to not just the future of the Mission Impossible franchise in general, but specifically anticipation for Dead Reckoning Part 1, Mission: Impossible - Dead Reckoning Part 1. As someone who teaches writing, the use of punctuation with these titles is a little unsettling.
Yeah.
I'd forgotten that there was a colon between Mission and Impossible.
It's tough. It's also, I think, the stylization for the second movie is MI:2, which means even though written out it's Mission: Impossible 2, the stylization on the poster was MI:2. Very strange. Let's get some.
They need a style guide. Yeah.
Let's get some form put on this.
Anyway, guys. So have you heard any early buzz for this movie? Like, I feel like it's mostly been positive that I've seen.
I feel like there was one. I'm sort of actively avoiding reading too much about it. I mean, this also coincides with like a shift in my social media consumption, where moving away from Twitter means I don't really have the film news concentration on the other methadone-like alternatives that I'm subscribed to with Twitter-like substances. So I don't get the sort of immediate thing, and I'm not going to the sort of threads or and I mean message board threads, not threads. But so on message boards and on like subreddits, I'm just not clicking on stuff about this because I'm like, I'm seeing it. I don't want to know. I don't want to hear anything. But I feel like there was an initial like burst of reactions, and the thing that was sent to me was someone being like, it's not very good. Like, it's actually a big letdown. From like my friends that are generally negative about a lot of things and just assume everything will be bad. So if they see one thing being like, oh, I guess this is gonna be bad too, like they've also not gonna do a good Mission Impossible movie. Great. And then they won't go see it. But they shared that, and then I was like, that sucks. And I clicked on it because it was Twitter, and I read it, and the first response was someone saying, didn't you also not like Top Gun Maverick? And the guy's response, the original author's response, was just like, yeah, I thought that movie was overrated and overblown. And I'm like, oh, so I guess I don't care what you think. Like, we just have very different opinions. Like, all due respect, you're allowed to have your opinion, but I'm just, I don't agree with that. And then every other thing that has come out in both sort of like printed critic reviews and again, all sort of little social media blurbs are just like, yeah, it's great. It's like, do you like Mission Impossible movies? It's like more of that. And like it's bigger and it's somehow better. Like it just keeps going. Like the people who think the trend is each movie's getting a little bit better, this one also got a little bit better. So good.
Lately, we've been hearing a lot of this is only half of a movie, right?
Yeah,
so Greg and I sort of talked about that a little bit with Spider-Verse, how people were like not prepared for it being part 1. People had that complaint about Dune. Mm-hmm. So this is very clearly Dead Reckoning Part 1.
Yes.
So there's a Part 2, Dead Reckoning Part 2 down the line. Do you think that's going to hurt its reception at all, right? Or I feel like I even heard somebody say like maybe people aren't going to go see this because they're like part 1. I'll just wait till both parts are out.
To me, that's a wild thing to choose to do, but like maybe. But it's also like, do they know how movies work? They're like, they don't release part one again when part two comes out like in a
Right.
theater. So I think that to the degree that these movies have like the cachet of you should go see it in a theater because the big effects and stunts, and Tom Cruise keeps yelling at me to go in a theater, so I should. That like, yeah, if you're waiting for part two, you're not going to see part one in the theater probably, unless you do like a marathon beforehand at like one particular time. But maybe. But I think that we've sort of come back around. I think they're, they did the. I think it was Harry Potter. I'm willing to be corrected. It was Deathly
The
Hallows.
Deathly Hallows Part 1 and 2, yeah.
Was when it was like, we're doing it part one and two. And that's when all the like series that were based on books were just like, well, wait a minute, what? Like, we can do part one and two. Like, we could get an extra movie out of this. And so it was like, Twilight part one and two, and Hunger Games part one and two. And then I think people got a little bit like, we're a little sick of part one and two. And then recently, it's been this shift from like, oh, it's these movies, they're part one and two when they're announced. And then when they come out, it's like, no, this is Across the Spider-Verse. No, this is Infinity War. This is just Dune. And then the movie starts and they're like, haha, it's part one, suckers. And the people in the theater are like, what? And then they're mad that it ends and there's not like, really an ending. So part of me is like, well, now that they've just like been open about it, our audience is going to be less annoyed that they're like, I guess I knew it was a part one.
There's know what they're signing up for.
Right. I guess it's, to me, it sort of feels like John Wick Chapter 3 Parabellum, where it's just like, you're just adding insanity to this title. Like, I don't care. Like, just give me the thing that you do, and I don't need to know what you're adding on. But maybe I wouldn't expect people to turn away because it's part one. I think they would be like, it's Tom Cruise's Mission Impossible. I'm there for it. I have seen a lot of people who are breaking down potentially this could be described as like taking hits of copium around Indiana Jones not being successful, who are very frustrated that it's like Indiana Jones is like a bomb and it's a huge flop. And then they're like, but it made the same amount of money that people are projecting Dead Reckoning to make in its first weekend. And like, that movie is being talked of as like clearly a success. Like, that's going to be a big hit, but like Dead Reckoning is supposed to make like 65 million, which is like what Indy made. And they're just like, actually, like, maybe that means Indiana Jones is successful. Which, whatever. I don't know about all that, but I do wonder, these are movies that make a lot of money. I wonder if it's like people like prognosticators and also like studio heads are like, oh, like Top Gun Maverick money, right? And I don't know if it will make that, because it just isn't planes going really fast and like, yay military groups doing stuff. It is like a spy movie, and they've done 6 of these, and we have a pretty good like track record of they're very successful, but they're not that successful. So I wonder if it makes like Fallout-ish money in a post-COVID environment. That would be really good. Could make a little less than Fallout because people don't go to the theaters as often. And then I wonder if folks will be like, well, that's a disappointment. Like, it didn't get where we thought it would go, because it wasn't at Maverick levels. And then start being like, it's because of the part one. Or
Maverick also had a very unique situation where it had endurance at the theater, right? Like word of mouth made it get a second and third and fourth wind, where people just kind of kept going to see it. And then when it hit streaming, the same thing happened. So I don't know what it would take to replicate that for this movie. But that'll be interesting to see. But yeah, it's interesting that the discourse is all relative to like, well, compared to what are your expectations of what success, what's your definition of success, and how does that change the way that you assess how something does?
Right. And it's also, I think everyone is still trying to figure out the, what the landscape really is post-COVID, how this all works. I'm looking at the numbers to see the legs on these movies. I mean, they've got pretty good. They got pretty good legs. They go for a little while. They seem to be like making a good amount of money over the course of like a month.
Oh, that's good.
In these earlier movies. But
is there anything that we know about what the story of this movie is supposed to be, or like are we starting fresh? Like, because you mentioned that Fallout was the end of a trilogy. So is
Yeah.
this just like starting a totally new story? Do you think there's going to be any carryover from what we're talking about?
Well, I mean, what I know from hearing about it and also like seeing the trailers is the character of Kittredge, who is the I guess he's the director. I didn't know if I realized this. He's the director of the IMF in the first movie. And he's the one who's like, we've been looking for a mole.
Oh,
We've been looking for a mole. And like this basically, you know, Cruz is like, this was a mole hunt. And he's like, yep. And you're the only one alive. So guess what? Like, you're probably the mole. I'm chasing you for the whole movie. He's the one
he's
in
the
the
old guy
trailer.
in the trailer.
In the trailer, who's just sort of like, you need to make a choice, Mr. Hunt. So he's back. And obviously, like, Simon Pegg is back. Ving Rhames is back. Rebecca Ferguson has an eye patch, which, I mean, don't get me started. But in the trailer, she's got an eye patch. Looks great. And so, you know, I think there will be that. I believe, though, is it the White Widow? Is that Vanessa Kirby's
Yeah, it's
character?
Vanessa Kirby's character.
I think she's back, like just listed in
so lots of people
in the cast. So a lot of people are back. I don't know what's happening in terms of the story. There's obviously a few new faces.
Right. Haley Atwell is the most notable one.
Yeah. You know, I don't know, like, is Angela Bassett going to be there? Like, because she was, you know, not the head of the IMF, but she was the director of the CIA.
She seemed like the logical replacement for Alec Baldwin to me.
Right. Well, or unless Renner comes back. But I haven't seen Renner in anything. But like Renner coming back and being like, I'm the head of the IMF now.
That would be fun.
Would make a lot of sense.
Right.
And it would be great.
He's done his Hawkeye, basically.
Yeah. And it would have been pre-plow that, like, you know, when they filmed this, they filmed it a while ago. So, you know, he would have been available. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, again, I've watched the trailers, of which, I mean, they started showing a trailer with no sort of actual sound from the movie, like before Top Gun, which, you know, is almost a year and a half before it came out. You know, and I've watched the other trailers since then, but I don't know what's actually going to happen in this movie, apart from a vague idea of some of the major stunt set pieces from just like the flashes they've shown. But yeah, I bet it's kind of going to be nonsense, and it's going to be super fun. And, you know, Ethan's going to have to put some people in danger, and then he's going to have to save them. And then he's probably going to win in the end. Although it's a part one, so maybe he won't win in the end.
Right.
And it'll be left where it's like, oh no, you didn't win. Now what? And then we'll get to wait a couple years.
The chips are down. Well, the chips have to be down so that he can come back.
It's true.
Well, I now am like way more excited for this movie than I was mere days ago. So I want to thank you and Greg for really nudging me in that direction.
Well, I'm glad that you took the nudge, and I'm glad that you ended up liking it. Anytime there's any sort of nudge bordering on harassment and coercion to watch something, it is very easy to then have it backfire. And even if it's something that someone might like, they might be like, I don't know, like whatever. But I'm glad you liked it. I think these are just really fun, and you know, they're not. I mean, they're not complicated, I guess, and they hit like cinema fan pleasure buttons that not everyone has, I guess. But I think if you have them, they're right there.
Right. And it's certainly, if someone's still listening, that is true for them as well.
I mean, we're 2 hours into the second recording that we have to stitch to the first recording that was an unknown amount of time before the audio crapped out. So
this might be our longest recording ever. I'm not sure. I'll have to go back and look.
It's possible it'll be longer than Dune Part 2, which they just said was going to be more than 3 hours long.
What?
I didn't
know that. We skipped movie news.
We did skip movie news, but now this is the good stuff for the people who waited all the way through. You maniacs. Dune Part 2 is 3 hours long. There's a Napoleon trailer. It looks really good. This is old news, very old news. But on the 4th of July, I went to a new rep movie house called Vidiots in Eagle Rock to watch Jaws, which is a masterpiece, and just absolutely plays like gangbusters in a room full of 250 people. So I recommend that. It's also the only good movie for the 4th of July. Not the only good movie. There's no movie better for the 4th of July. So next year, you all have 359 days to get
make arrangements
to go see Jaws. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Reteed. I think this was like as usual, a very thorough and fun conversation. Where can folks find you, or do you want to just plug our fancy new Instagram account?
Check out. Yeah, don't look for me. I don't do anything. Check out our new Instagram account, which is I gotta double check and look at the account. It is The Long Take Review, all one word, on Instagram. Also on Threads, because I like in a what could be very lucky or very unlucky depending on how all this unfolds. I was like, I'll start an Instagram account, and I started it, and then 12 hours later it was like Threads is launching, and it was like, I guess I should sign up for Threads, everyone's doing it. So there's a few things up there, and as someone who is just like very averse to dealing with social media under my own name, I feel much more likely to respond to anyone who has questions, feedback, thoughts, responses on our Instagram thing. And if you, Jen, if you want, it should be off my conversation probably, but if you want the password to also be able to check the Instagram account, we can do that. I don't mean to bogart.
Is that your way of being like, if you see something weird on the Instagram account, it's not Jen, it's me?
Well, I mean, look, yes, that's currently all like terrible Instagram captions are me over and under thinking at the same time whatever I'll say on there. But yeah, if it normalizes, then Jen has taken the password and made it and it started like doing the things you're supposed to do, like ask direct questions of your readers to try to increase engagement, instead of just doing things like throwing out the cover to the theme song from the Mission Impossible done by the two guys from U2 that don't have nicknames, which is how I set up. Jen, on her own account, at Subchakchai on Instagram, posted a shot of each of the 6 movies and asked her readers, which one do you like? And I was just like, here's a CD single. That's it. That's all I had. And I hashtag Mission Impossible and U2. And that's it. So there's a chance that Jen's going to take over the social media.
But maybe your CD has our next mission, should we choose to accept it, that will self-destruct.
I hope so. It does have, which I also noted, 2 titles. It says CD 2 titles in the top left corner. I don't know what that means. That feels like a very CD single.
It's thing. Clearly code for something.
By the way, you were tagged as Larry Mullen Jr., the drummer for U2, and I thought he's the chiller, cooler person, whereas Adam Clayton's kind of a mess. So,
I appreciate that. You can find me, as PT said, at Subchakchai, SOPCHOCKCHAI on Instagram, and Qui-Gon Jen on Letterboxd. Oh, and now I'm doing it. I'm going to add another thing, and we're not ending yet.
Let's do it.
If you post a review of a Mission Impossible movie on Letterboxd right now, something happens.
Oh.
Something happens. I don't want to spoil it.
Okay.
But your mission, listener, should you choose to accept it, is to rewatch a Mission Impossible movie, post a new review on Letterboxd, and just watch what happens.
This podcast episode will self-destruct in 3.5 hours when it's done unspurling.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Take care.
Thank you for listening. You can follow The Long Take on Substack at thelongtake.substack.com. Subscribe for free to receive reviews of films with Oscar buzz, as well as new films and series from pop franchises like Star Wars and Marvel.